Do do do. Do 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 do. Check 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 Gemini. Checking 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 check 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 check. Come on. All right. Check complete. Success. Success. And now we wait. No, that tea is really good.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Kind of has like a bubblegum smell too. Yeah, it doesn't taste like it, but it kind of smells like it. Open up my snacks now so it's not disruptive later. Oh yeah, nothing like Costco Quest bars. Oh yeah. Are you gonna go to jujitsu later?
I'm planning on.
Cool. Yo,
Yo.
there he is. All right. Looks like we are good to go.
Cool. Let me open up the listo questions.
Yes. All right, folks, listen up and listen good while Mike gets set up here. There is about 17 pages of questions today, so we're going to be very upfront with you that we're going to try and answer them as briefly and concisely as we can so that it doesn't take us 4 hours to answer all the questions. So don't be mad if we don't embellish as we usually do on all of them. We're going to try and keep it brief.
Yep.
Fair warning.
Okay. Yep. All right. Let's start our 1-2 punch, JMO.
You got it, buddy. Let's hit it.
All right. Martin Krumer says, "Hey, Docs, it was a pleasure meeting you both in London. You probably don't remember me, but I was the tall guy in the white shirt. Of course, we remember you. The one with a black outline of a guy holding a chainsaw in negative space saying free hugs. Well, I actually did not remember that.
I hung out with him at when we did the lifting session.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm super introverted, so I hope it did not seem too awkward. No worries. Anyway, I had some questions I wanted to ask, but I figured Mike probably wanted to lay down and die after lecturing and interacting with people all day on no sleep, so I decided to wait until this Q&A. All right, number one. Mike said during the lecture the 3-to-8 sets would probably be best to maximize stimulus to fatigue ratio per set. Get a proper pump, etc. I was wondering, does that depend on the kind of exercise you are doing / how stimulative the exercise is? For example, stiff-legged deadlifts versus lying ham curls. Maybe. Probably not. Here's why. The stiff-legged deadlift continues to be highly stimulative as you do many sets, but its fatigue goes crazy. Whereas ham curls, something like that, probably will never start to get crazy in fatigue, but the stimulus magnitude will start to fall off because it's just not that much of an exercise. So if you're talking about raw stimulus, yes, there's a difference. If we're talking about fatigue accumulation, there's a difference. But the two, for isolation moves and compounds, or for bigger movements and smaller movements, they tend to cancel each other out to some extent, right? So really, the 3-to-8 sets probably applies to both types. That being said, I think, yeah, I was gonna say, like you could do 10 sets of curls and survive the fatigue versus 10 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts, but I just don't think you're getting a whole lot of stimulus towards the end of that. James, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. My guess would be that for some exercises, especially if you introduce them as a new exercise, the MEV tends to be very low. Like a good example would be like dumbbell pec flies and stiff-legged deadlifts, the one that he listed. Those, like, you can, like the first week, you can maybe get away with doing 2 sets as like your MEV, and then they'll go up like anything else. But I kind of tend to agree with Mike more off. I think what he said is true more often than not. I think there's a couple of exceptions to that, maybe, where you can get off doing a little bit less. But I think for the most part, 3-to-8's pretty solid. And again, this is like on averages, you kind of like exercise population-based averages. So there's going to be a little factor there.
Now, so remember that the 3-to-8 sets is stimulus to fatigue ratio optimization, not raw stimulus magnitude. So for example, there may be enough. If you do stiff-legged deadlifts first week, you could do 2 sets and be just fine, right? And that might mean you need to do 4 sets of hamstring curls in order to get the same total stimulus. But the stimulus to fatigue ratio probably doesn't change much. So if you decide to do 4 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts, you get a shitload of stimulus, but a shitload of fatigue too. And if you did, only 2 sets of hamstring curls, then we could make the critique that you're not getting enough stimulus. It would be correct critique. You should probably do like 4. But also, you're just not getting a ton of fatigue. So it's kind of no harm, no foul, right? It's, yes, there's going to be the stimulus to fatigue ratio that's best is going to be in the 3-to-8 sets, but the amount of raw stimulus magnitude that you might need might be a little bit outside of that, above that, or below that.
Yeah, solid.
Number 2, also, how does weight on the bar going down over the course of sets influence the stimulus to fatigue ratio? For example, if you do 15 sets of chest a week, training twice a week and doing 7 sets one day, 8 sets another, versus training 3 times a week and doing 5 sets each time, we're not having to go down and weight as much due to splitting the volume not be a bit more stimulative, or would that be offset? Or you talked about with the first sets having less stimulus due to having to get started first.
I'm not sure if that's so much a stimulus to fatigue ratio question as like a frequency question. Or maybe
Yeah.
I'm misinterpreting it.
No, I think the stimulus to fatigue ratio, the most we can say about it right now is that it's optimized between 3 to 8 sets. Nothing in your example exceeds those, so I can't say definitively which one of those is better. And remember, the number of hard sets you do relatively tends to equate outcomes. So if your weight goes down on the bar or weight goes up, it doesn't really matter, because if the sets are close to failure, 4 RIR or less, it's all kind of the same. If you don't exit that 3 to 8 window, which none of your examples do, then there's really no critique to make. So for example, if your question was like, what if you do 10 sets per workout twice a week, or like roughly 6 to 7 sets 3 times a week, which one would have the higher SFR? I would say the higher SFR would be the 3 time a week program, because that is within the 3 to 8 sets, but the 10 sets are both exceeding it. So your example, I can't answer because I don't know. I would be making something up. I think it's just about the same, which is, there's a recent study by Brad Schoenfeld and colleagues which showed just a tiny bit greater of an effect size for 2 time a week training than 3 time a week training, volume equated, right? And there's a lot of studies like that. So when you try to piece apart 2 time versus 3 time a week training, you start to really, really be pulling hairs, unless you're doing more than 10 sets per session, more than 8 sets per session during each one of those.
Very good. And I think, like, again, I think that's kind of deviating into another. I think we're trying to tie in stimulus to fatigue ratio in kind of, I don't want to say unrelated, but like not directly related issues. So just maybe think about that. Because like what you're basically asking is like a volume landmarks question and a frequency question, not so much FS or stimulus to fatigue question.
Yeah. Number 3, during the lecture, you used the example of doing one set of several different leg exercises during one leg session. Taking that out of practical world, does that mean if one, for example, does easy bar curls and regular dumbbell curls for biceps, you would recommend only doing one of them per bicep training session? Absolutely not. That was simply an example. And actually, we talk about this in the rough draft of the book, that there is a trade-off there between when you switch exercises. It's a whole different discussion. At some point, doing the same exercise, because of the staleness effect and various other effects, the SFR of the exercise starts to fall independently of how many sets of that movement you've done. So doing another exercise can actually boost SFR. What that looks like is probably in the at least 4 sets range. Okay, there's an argument to make that if you do 4 sets of an exercise, you can do another exercise and get a better average SFR for the session by doing 2 sets of 4 versus 2 exercises of 4 versus 1 exercise of 8 sets. Outside of that, there's not a really big clear cutoff. So that's kind of a big different discussion. It was just an example. And then he says, or is it different since they are not very technical exercises? Would it depend on how many sets you do in a session? If you do 4 sets, stick with 1 exercise. If you do 8 sets, you can do both. Oh yeah, totally. Martin, you just answered your own question. Super. Yeah, that rough 4 set cutoff. Now remember, rough cutoff means it really depends on the exercise. And you actually put a very big point, which we're not going to belabor, but is it different since they are not very technical exercise? That plays into it. Like if you have a very technical exercise and it's 2-part, very technical exercise that tends to experience a lot of postural or technical fatigue, because it's 2 different things. Some technical exercises you can keep doing because the technique's tough, but you don't get tired much. So if there's both of those things, you probably can't do a whole lot of sets. Instant example, high bar good morning or stiff-legged deadlift, right? It takes a lot of technique to do because otherwise your knees start drifting, so on and so forth, back starts rounding, and you get really tired in precisely the postural muscles that you're supposed to be using. So James, have you ever seen someone do 4 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts and then 4 sets of back offset stiff-legged deadlifts? I've never seen that, mostly because I've worked with some athletes whose hamstrings can recover, but after about 4 or 5 or 6 sets of stiff-legged deadlift, you're just not doing stiff-legged deadlifts anymore. You're doing something.
Survive. I don't. That's one of those like very unique examples where it's like you really can't deviate too far outside of the 3 to 5 set rep or 3 to 5 set range. Anyone who's doing more than that or claiming to do more, I would be very skeptical.
Yeah, 100%. It's some kind of some kind of brand of fuckery is afoot when you're starting.
Yeah, and usually it's technique. Then you watch them do it, and you're like, oh, I see why.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Says this lecture also made me think: do finisher exercises actually do anything different when used as a finisher versus on their own? Is there a difference between 3 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts and 3 sets of lying ham curls twice per week compared to doing only stiff-legged deadlifts one day and lying ham curls the other? Besides the higher fatigue on the deadlift day, just depend on how stimulative the exercise is. For example, leg extensions might be a good exercise to use after squats because your quads are already highly stimulated. But doing them on their own in a session is not enough to stimulate growth. I'm actually just not sure. every single bit of the research says that if you equate for volume and you do the same exercises, it doesn't really matter how you split them up. Now, mind you, that research is done mostly on untrained undergraduates, and it's done with really low sample sizes and improper, not improper, just imprecise measurement techniques, so we can't tell. We certainly know it's not a big deal. I think what you have to do is look at it in the context of whatever exercise you use in the context of the training program, and use the Ghetto SFR estimators that we talked about, like pump, soreness, etc., feel, technique. If you do 3 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts one day and 3 sets of lying ham curls another day, and you find that the stiff-legged deadlifts are fine by themselves, but you'd rather kind of pre-exhaust with hamstring curls to feel the hamstring better, and the lying leg curls are fine by themselves, but you really just kind of have to do a shitload of sets that way, and you don't feel it much because there's never a raw, hardcore, really good compound movement to really burn the hams. And then you try doing both of them on the same day, and it works out better. Just it raises the SFR of the whole session. Then that works. Like, there's no theoretical reason so much to suspect these very predictable things that we can generalize into dependable principles. But because we've given you the tools of what the SFR is and how to measure it in vivo, so to speak, you can use it for yourself. And many people will get very different outcomes. Like, some people, they have a great mind-muscle connection with stiff-legged deadlifts, and some people, lying ham curls destroy them, and vice versa, so on and so forth. James?
Yeah, I don't really have much to contribute for that specific issue. The other thing I just want to mention is, like, the finisher exercise notion is kind of just a made up thing. There's not really any exercise that is a finisher. The only thing that makes it a finisher is that you did it last because of either priorities or just good exercise programming structure. So in the physique world, they're not as constrained by exercise order as you are in other sports, where there's a very clear hierarchy of order of operations. So, like, just calling something a finisher is just, it just means it was a low priority thing for that particular session in this context. And in other contexts, it's the same thing. It's just like, okay, well, this was the least muscle mass, least technical, least important thing that we're doing today. So it's at the end. That's it. So just don't. I'm just my point being, don't buy into this idea of finishers, of putting something at the end as if it does something magical. It doesn't.
Yeah, 100%. Number 5, you recommend cereal after a training session due to high glycemic index. I was wondering, does that mean one should only stick to sugary cereal, like something like Special K, because it has more volume and fewer calories per 100 grams, but also has 12 grams of fiber per 100 grams? Would that mean it's too fiber rich to use after a training session? Well, I mean, I think the level of specificity you're talking about here is basically pro bodybuilder type shit. And it's really pertinent mostly for people who use exogenous insulin. But I assume you're not using exogenous insulin, so it probably doesn't matter much. And I think a ton of concerns are more superlative, especially in your case, like food palatability reward hypothesis, the degree of satiety of the food, so on and so forth. So you can eat any kind of cereal you like and see almost identical results. If I had to be pushed for an answer, especially with multiple day training, high glycemic cereals are better. Doesn't necessarily mean the ones with the highest sugar, because a lot of times the sugar is fructose, and fructose is not very glycemic. So a lot of times you have to look up the glycemic indices of cereal independently in websites. There's tons of websites. USDA keeps a tracker. So you just find the highest GI cereal and eat that if you're really particular. One of our fellow RP coaches, Alex Harrison, exclusively ate, I believe, Frosted Flakes and would never eat anything else. It was the highest index cereal for a while.
It's great.
He also had Strided glutes drug-free at 190 pounds for no goddamn good reason. So I'm not going to tell him he's wrong. And it was, on the national bobsled team. But, this is the kind of thing that, like, just eat the cereal you like, and as long as it doesn't have a ton of fat in it or is made up entirely of fiber, I think you're missing out on almost nothing, especially if you train just once a day, and then it almost completely doesn't matter.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch. Once a day, it basically doesn't matter. So,
number 6, if one should avoid junk food on a diet in a couple of weeks after, due to cravings and the risk of overeating, but at the same time should consume high glycemic carbs like white bread and kid cereal after workout. How do you do both? You don't. You trade off, right? So as your diet gets more and more intense, you probably remove very glycemic carbs mostly or wholly from your diet, and then you reintroduce them slowly, just like you do junk food. So when I finished the last diet I did, it was a very hard diet. I got very lean. Towards the end, I was having only whey protein in my shakes. I wasn't even having any carbs, glycemic or not. Right? And then I would come home and my first post-workout meal would be entirely low glycemic carbs. That's it. With when you get half of the normal carbs you need to fill out your glycogen stores, their glycemic index does not matter, because you're not topping out dick anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So very moot point. But yeah, the answer is it's a spectrum. Right? So as you diet harder and harder, you decrease the glycemic index of the things you're consuming.
Yeah.
Number 7. James, just jump in anytime. If you got nothing, don't worry about it. Just interrupt me if I'm rambling. Number 7, this is a bit different, but after watching some of the videos on the site, Nutrition for Muscle Gain Fat Loss, Mike mentions is for RP Plus, RP University. What's RP University? I've tried searching on Google for it, but I can't seem to find anything. Martin, we have a personal hacked tag for you and all of your devices to be completely blind on Google to RP University. It's a real place where James and I teach. We have friends. There's a magic dragon. James, Harry Potter went to RP University for a semester, right? Until he got beat up. There's that whole hospital trip fiasco.
That's
anyway,
right. It was a big lawsuit.
You motherfucker, you graduated Hogwarts. Time for RP University, you bitch. He's like, do you play Quidditch? Like, we play real sports, you motherfucker. Fuck up out of here.
Don't start with the Quidditch. That was a sore spot for me for a while.
For the rugby, it was amazing. The first time I ever saw that, I was like, oh, this is a thing. RP University is something we're eventually going to do, and all of the content we're uploading is to that end. So we're trying to upload slowly but surely every single basic exercise and sports science course onto RP Plus. And eventually, we're going to make that a separate division called RP University, where you can go and take tests about what you learned and possibly get a certificate. So it won't be a certificate that's worth dick as far as formal certification, but it could be like an RP certification maybe in the future. It's years away, so if you ask us about it any time sooner than years away, you'll get the same answer. RP University is a magical place with dragons.
It's like the new Star Wars theme park in Disney. Same idea.
Will never arrive. Excellent questions, as usual, Martin. Thanks so much, and it was awesome meeting you. All right. Mr. Will Adams says, hey, docs, in the past you've recommended capping intra-session volume at 10 sets per body part. Would it be advisable to go to 11 to 12 during the final week of the meal? I say mezzo, probably an autocorrect. Damn, your meals last
This meal is lasting for months.
Because of the extra recovery and the upcoming deload, I think that is not just okay. I think that the recent literature and a lot of theory that goes behind the functional overreaching means that's probably a good idea. I'll put you this way. If you end all or most of your sessions at 6 to 8 sets per session per muscle group at the end of your accumulation, you either have a very low MRV or you're just not pushing it hard enough. So I think 11 to 12 in the final week is awesome.
And just to reiterate something, so when Mike gives some of these recommendations like minimum number of sets, maximum number of sets, there is an inter-individual fudge factor built into that. So if you said Dr. Mike said 10 sets and that's how I'm doing the rest of my programming, you probably are missing out. You might actually be at 8 sets, or you might even be at 12 sets for a good normal day. So just keep that in mind. Don't take that as like an absolute threshold cutoff, right? There's going to be some individual variability, and there might even be some variability within yourself depending on how conditions are. Like if you're in a mass phase or maybe a cut phase or something like that, might be a little bit different on some scenarios. So my only point is that don't say 10 is what he said. So that's what we're going with. There's going to be some fudge there.
100%.
And that's why the volume landmarks are handy. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
Sorry,
exactly. No, totally.
That was it.
All right. Jeff Hoonhane. Jeff, your last name is spelled wrong by all phonetic accounts. So
whenever I see his name, there's a character in the Full Metal Alchemist called Hohenheim, and that's what his name reminds me of.
There you go. Docs, I have a client that recently became pregnant. Jeff, you did it. Your boy
You the
did
man.
it. She is 6 weeks pregnant, not old, I assume. And I was wondering if you guys have any experience working with a client that is pregnant. What were some things you noticed that changed? How would you approach the situation? I know they can still resistance train, but it should be more maintenance than anything. Do you guys have any resources off the top of your head that I can check out, or even more info on training clients that are preggo? Thanks. This is way outside of my area of expertise. There are entire books on the subject, though. I would advise you to get them. I have no idea what those books are. JMO?
There is a section in Renaissance Woman that does deal with this a little bit.
Dieting or training?
Oh, for training, or is he asking
about
training
diet? Client?
Oh,
so
training.
Diet, unless you're an RD, fire your client.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, if it was diet, I would say that there's some resources available to you. But for training, I'm not sure. At that point, you got to go with the doctor's orders.
Yep. Sean Murakawa Rubin says, hello. I guess I'm out of things to talk about regarding Marvel now. Shame. I do recall, I think, that you guys are John Wick fans.
We are.
Legal to be a not John Wick fan. Actually, my wife and I are fucking unbelievably pumped for the third one. Have you seen the third one? No, but that comes out. It's already out, so my wife and I are probably.
They're already planning a release date for the fourth one now.
Oh
Fuck
my
me.
god, that's so great! It's the best fucking news I've heard in a dog's age.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So, questions. I've heard several people share the opinion that the largest contributing reason why so many personal trainers are often so misinformed is lack of a national board. While in most other industries there exists an overseeing national council that ensures a minimum standard of current knowledge to be learned, there's just no such group for the personal training industry. There actually exist multiple such groups for the personal training industry. What do you guys think about this? Would you say it is likely one of the largest contributing factors? So, super soapbox time. I got this one.
Okay. Hit it.
Governing bodies in almost every industry are designed with the notion or politically correct idea that they are for the consumer's protection and for the betterment of the industry. In reality, in almost every economics study ever done, the individuals pushing them are almost always companies that are currently at the top that have large operating costs that want to keep out competitors. Okay, so ratifying or certifying that something is of a certain quality does not improve that thing's quality. It simply separates things into classes of allowed to consume and not allowed to consume. So in the personal training industry, if we had a national governing body that licensed personal trainers, what you would see is a fucking monumental increase in the price of personal training because they would limit the amount of personal training by whatever arbitrary standard they got you to take the test with. And the cost would be insane. And most people that currently personal train or consume personal trainers, and many people will be priced right out of the market. And most personal trainers, maybe not most, a whole lot of them would lose their fucking jobs. Therefore, on economic grounds, it is probably a very not a good idea to be for a national governing body that has exclusive monopoly power to license personal trainers. However, there are multiple governing bodies currently, the NSCA being a great example, ACSM being another example, and tons of others that do a very good job licensing trainers, all voluntarily. So here's the deal. It all comes down to the consumer. Would you take a Lyft ride or an Uber ride from someone without a driver's license? Probably not, okay? But do you give a shit if they were licensed by the super great Lyft board of certification to be a super driver? You probably don't give a fuck, right? Unless you're putting like your 4-year-old into the car by yourself, and then you might pay for the more premium service. So when you're a consumer of personal training, and the only thing your personal trainer has is abs, and you literally never asked about education or asked about anything, you're going to get what you fucking paid for, which is dick, right? Or, you know, luck of the draw. If you get a personal trainer, if you, soapbox time, if you, forget about personal training, talk about online coaching, same idea. If you really want the best, you just hire from someone from 3DMJ or RP or, you know, one of Greg Knuckles' people, and you know these people are educated to the fucking bones, have shitload of real-world experience, they're the fucking best. You're going to pay a price for that shit, right? So if you said everyone has to be RP standard educated, there would be like 300 per online coaches in the whole world, okay? And then they would cost $1 zillion fucking dollars and nobody would get any help. So is it one of the largest contributing factors that there's no licensing? Absolutely not. The largest contributing factor is your average consumer does not give a fuck, flying fuck about who their personal trainer is. They you know, these people buy food at Whole Foods and pay $8 a fucking pound for food when they could be paying $3 because they just don't think through the shit that much. It's just consumer preference, and they're not super scientific, and they fucking get what they pay for. So if you are interested in the highest quality of personal training, it is currently incredibly easy to find it through licensing boards. You can do a 5-minute Google search and find out who the best trainers are. If you don't know anything about the industry, you just have to pay money for it. Most people are not willing to do that. And by the way, if you mandated licensing, training would all cost at least as much as the best training does now. So there's no way out of that. And then you would have like unlicensed personal trainers, like ghetto style, like you get black market and personal training. It will be fucking insane. The entire idea of compulsory monopolistic standards of licensing work in like 3 industries okay due to some kind of market information saturation mechanisms. And then for most industries, it's just demonstrably terrible idea. Sorry, James.
No, it was great. Great rant. And I agree with Mike entirely. Just another real world example. So in the field of collegiate strength and conditioning, they actually do have this, where you have to be certified through one of two major organizations, the National Strength and Conditioning Association or the CSCCA, whatever the fuck that one is.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that give you? gives you a bunch of retarded, stupid ass strength coaches, right? It doesn't change a fucking thing. You watch collegiate strength conditioning, you get plenty of stupid stuff. So it doesn't actually improve the outcomes at all.
The test, but
you pass the test, you know, who cares at that point? It doesn't do anything. And the thing is, there's also no like, it's just like a piece of paper that you get. So if you go and do stupid shit in the field after getting the certification, no one's going to follow up with you and regulate you at that point, right? So the idea of regulation is kind of silly because no one's going to go, oh, well, you're not following what was listed in the Essentials of Strength Conditioning 5th edition. You're doing this other thing. You know, you were revoking your license. Nobody's going to do that. So it's pointless.
Yep. All right. Number 2, but that's a great question, by the way. Number 2, after all the praise you guys have been dishing out about assisted pull-up machines lately, I've decided to give it a shot. The problem is the machine in my gym makes a terrible loud clanking noise at the top when the weight stacks collide. James, what is it like when weight stacks collide?
Oh, it's a Power Man 5000 song about that. Nice reference. It took me like half a second.
Yeah, it was good. Crystal and I were watching My 600-Pound Life earlier today with dinner, and one of the guys had a picture of himself from like the early 2000s, and he had the Limp Bizkit like mini Fu Manchu square, and he had the backwards hat on, and I was like, oh my god, like that's really an era. That was an era. Anyway,
90s, early 2000s.
Amazing. All right. As such, when I use the machine, I contract forcefully out of the bottom, but either stop contracting about midway through or sometimes even purposefully slow myself down at the top so I don't make as much noise. So technically, I'm getting full range of motion, quote unquote, but the upper half is kind of just getting there through momentum from the bottom. Is doing this going to significantly affect the gains I get from this machine? If so, how can I alleviate makeup for this somewhat by holding a contraction at the top for a second or two? Answer your own question. So yeah, you got to slow down because you don't want to be a dick that makes a crazy clanky noise. But what you got to do is hold a P contraction for 1 or 2 seconds at the very top and squeeze the fuck out of your lats and then do a slow eccentric and then repeat. Towards the later reps, you're going to be so close to failure at the top, you won't even be able to make loud clanks. So it's a self-solving problem. It sucks. I wish you could get better contractions all the time, but I think this way alleviates most things, James.
100% agree. And you kind of get the opposite effect if you wanted to do like a band assisted pull up. So if you're really worried about it, you could do, you know, some part of the year you do the machine, another part of the year you do the band. The band emphasizes the top instead of the bottom. Perfect. And then there you go. Boom.
It's really good insight. Number 3. My whole training career, I've naturally gravitated towards heavy weights and low reps, even though I train for hypertrophy. For me, doing anything above 8 reps, I just find uncomfortable, makes me tired. Even mentally. I always dread having to do them and never look forward to them. But heavy weights, I find so much more comfortable both mentally and physically. I think I even get a better mind-muscle connection with heavier weights, which I know makes no sense. It makes plenty of sense if you're pretty fast twitch. Could all this indicate that I'm possibly fast twitch dominant? Yes. Maybe. Or is it more likely that I'm just lazy and dislike higher reps? We can't rule that out.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, no one really enjoys doing the higher reps. That's the thing, right? No one gets fucking amped up to do squats for 15 reps.
Totally. Sean, what you got to do is real talk yourself. Try some higher rep training and see, especially as you introduce it with lower volumes and do a whole couple mesocycles of higher reps. See if you get if your SFR, stimulus to fatigue ratios, are better or worse. Like basically, do you get as pumped? Do you get a sore from the same number of sets of lighter weights as heavier weights? Do you get a mind-muscle connection that develops? It's even better. If you start to use lighter weights and you find that, okay, really I am missing out on something. For example, you say, I love heavy pull-ups, right? And you always do sets of 5 in the pull-up, and you're like, I get great pumps. And then someone actually has you try like several sets of like 20 to 30 reps on pull-downs, and you're like, oh man, that sucked. I hated it. But you're like, in the back of your mind, you're like, oh my God, my lat pump is going to kill me. Like, I feel like my shoulder's going to pop off. Like, this is incredible. You got to be like, oh, God damn it. Like, for example, do I like to do high rep leg presses? No, nobody likes to do those. They fuck my quads up like nothing else. So I do them regularly. So it's got to be like, this is why there's a beautiful thing about the stimulus to fatigue ratio and the way we go about deriving it in real world, pumps, soreness, so on and so forth, my muscle technique, is if you rate it, like you literally take out a piece of paper and 1 through 3 rate how you're feeling out of the exercises, it's not really subjective, right? It is subjective, but it's based on objectively observed criteria, things actually, physiological criteria, things actually happening to your body. And then at some point, you got to conclude that the shit that sucks is the shit you got to do. Like, for example, I learned a long time ago that for me, I don't do deadlifts now for injury reasons. Back when I deadlifted, anything less than an 8 rep deadlift was too light to accomplish what I wanted out of deadlifts, which is erector hypertrophy. My erector simply just didn't get sore. But 8 RM or less, my erectors got blown up. I didn't like deadlifting heavy. I would like to do higher reps, but it just didn't fucking work. So I had to deadlift heavy, plain and simple.
Deadlifting heavy blows.
Yeah, but sometimes it gets you jacked, and that's all you got.
Yep, totally.
All right. Shimmy Hacker says, how long is too long to wait in between reps on a set at the tail end of a set when things start to get difficult? Whatever is inappropriate for you to track. Workout to workout to workout.
Between reps?
Yeah, I think like you curl and you're like
like breathers.
Yeah. I will say this: if the lactate has dissipated completely, you're waiting too long. That's it.
I mean, take like 1 to 2 breaths and go. The more breaths you do, the more out of whack your whole thing gets, and then it becomes a tracking problem, like Mike said.
100%. So like advanced physiological rationale aside, the Mike and James answer is if you're taking more than 3 breaths between reps, you're into some fuckery.
And like, what are you trying to do at that point?
Yeah, exactly.
Like
just the set is over. Just do another set.
You're turning your set into the equivalent of a marathon.
Yep. Is rage ever a useful tool in training? Controlling channel rage, of course. Is it rage ever a useful tool when you're doing your work as a way to really streamline or tunnel vision or focus? I'll answer that first, and then James can go. Is rage ever a useful tool in training? It can be a useful tool in training with very, very controlled during peaking phases. Definitely during meets in powerlifting, maybe a little less in weightlifting, not so much in combat sport because it's too technical. But peaking training in powerlifting and definitely powerlifting competition, rage can be very well used. Rage in hypertrophy training is a really stupid idea because it takes your stimulus to fatigue ratio and drops it upside down. And then is rage ever a useful tool when you're doing your work? Jesus Christ. Designing apps is the opposite of that. If I can have no ability to become angry, I'll be 50 times better at doing my work. The way you do almost any real world work is through a calm, just completely serene attitude of open-mindedness and acceptance of what is, and a willingness to work on improving what is not optimal. Rage is the worst goddamn thing ever for that, James.
Yeah, so mostly agree with Mike here. Is rage ever a useful tool in training? Very selectively, probably only for, couple times a year type scenarios. For bodybuilding training, basically none. Is rage a useful tool when you're doing work? So no, it's not to actually do the work. But what you end up finding is like if you are raging for whatever reason, a lot of times you are often that accompanies stress response, which can be associated with like feelings of heightened alertness and desire to do things. You're getting like a fight or flight response, more or less. So sometimes when you are raging, if you can find something to distract yourself and take advantage of like that heightened sense of awareness and something like that, that can be a distraction from your current rage situation. But I think getting rage for the purposes of trying to be productive is totally ass backwards, like Mike already said. So I think when you are mad, you can channel some of that into something productive as a distraction, but not as a motive, not as like a means to an end for getting work done.
Yeah, you'd be way more productive if you hadn't been pissed to begin with.
Exactly.
All right. Do you think the deadlift conventional or sumo deficit, or I guess any of these, movement is useful to help improve athletic performance in field sports like basketball, football, soccer, rugby, and tennis? An RDL variation, of course, is great because of how it strengthens the hamstrings. Lord knows athletes can never have strong enough hamstrings. But not the regular deadlift variant or small derivatives of it like I listed above. Oh, my personal opinion is I would love to hear what James says. Is infinitely more qualified than me on this. My opinion is that the deadlift is other than as a developmental move in building a base for getting strong enough to learn to do the mid-thigh pull and pull from the floor, I think the deadlift is just not the best movement for sport performance. And especially in the inclusion of advanced athletes, I think it's fucking stupid. Beginners and intermediates can benefit from the deadlift because it just makes you fucking strong in pulling, which can eventually make you super strong in ability to pull things dynamically. But the deadlift, for example, the deadlift power output is dog shit. And its amount of fatigue that it imposes is super high. And also the amount of, transfer to the muscles and movements you actually need in those sports you listed is not great. Wrestlers and some other athletes like that, the deadlift can be great because it makes you cock strong. But for like people that run around, not a big fan. James?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think for beginners, it's kind of serves as like a foundational technique for learning other lifts later on and for building your core and but we'll say trunk musculature up really thick and strong so that you can become a really great presser, push presser, squatter, clean and jerker, all of those things later on. I think once you hit kind of the intermediate stage, the stimulus to fatigue ratio issue becomes incredibly prevalent. If your athlete still has a lot of weakness, especially like in their trunk and like holding up their body, like if you have a rugby guy and he consistently is collapsing in the scrum all the time, you might consider, if the needs analysis is pointing in that direction, keeping it in, but you're making a calculated trade-off because you know the inclusion of heavy deadlifts is going to come at the cost of doing a lot of other stuff. So I would say usually around the intermediate stage, you have to have a very clearly defined need for it to continue. It's served as a really great foundation for most of your athletic endeavors, and now you're moving on to bigger, better things like clean pulls and jumping movements and da-da-da-da. So I would say at that point you can use like SLDLs or good mornings for hamstring stuff, but regular deadlift can phase out. Sumo deadlift I almost never use for athletics outside of power.
Yeah, I don't know what that's for, yeah. All right, Lucas Pazzi 4 Mile says, good evening, gentlemen. So I'm back from the hip/lower back injury. Short question this time. I'm following the male physique template 6-day full body. If I'm making progress on reps and weight on the bar during a cut, would it be in my best interest to just rate zeros, since adding more sets would add more fatigue for an exponentially smaller amount of gains, if any? I think you should rate just accurately. If you're really burdened by the cut, then what you do is you rate it zeros because you feel burdened. If you're not burdened on a cut, and if you have a planned progression, you're getting through super well, just rate it accurately and you'll be able to do a shitload of volume. And because you're making really good progress in reps of weight on a cut, you're probably gaining muscle. Gaining muscle on a cut, especially when you're coming back from injury, is a real thing. So the real thing is, like, people say, should I rate things on a cut differently? Probably not very differently, because to be honest, the algorithm kind of takes care of itself. Like, if you're making great gains, fucking get them. But if you're not, then it's because you feel limited. So you're saying, oh, but I'm limited on a cut. Well, your evidence is a direct contradiction to that. Rate accurately and let the shit figure itself out.
Yeah, so like when you overthink the question, right, you're actually defeating the purpose of the actual rating at that point, because you're trying to think like, well, what is this adjustment going to do? Da-da-da-da. The rating is literally meant to be like, if you ever play the game with your friend, like, what are you thinking about right now? Penis. Ah, damn it. Right? Don't think about it. You just answer truthfully, and it's a self-sorting issue. The moment that you start overthinking and overanalyzing and saying, well, if I do this, then this is going to happen. If I do that, then that's going to happen. Nope, you've already fucked it up. You're not actually rating it honestly, and it's not going to do what it's meant to do. So don't think about it too hard. It's literally just like right off the top of your head, how do you feel about this one? Rate it honestly and let it go from there. And if you fuck up, it'll become obvious later and you'll adjust later on. That's all.
Yep. All right. Next question. Since I'm doing the 6-day full body template, includes calves, is it really only the second time I've ever trained calves? When your calves get sore, is it supposed to feel like it's not my calves, but actually the sole that's sore? Only slightly joking. Maybe I'm overreaching, going too close to failure. No, we probably overdid it on the calves in the beginning for that situation. So yeah, you'll be a little sore. It's nothing your calves can't recover from, and some pretty good overreaching, they'll get big. So I wouldn't worry about it. And then that leads me to a third question. I almost always feel heated. I almost always feel healed or didn't get sore at all by the time my next workout. For most of the muscle soreness is around, but for the end of the mesocycle, I feel like I should have stopped +1ing most things a long time ago. Is this a sign that I've been going too close to failure the whole time? Not necessarily. Or maybe muscle fiber typing thing? Probably not. Does it mostly just come down to whether progress on the lifts is being made or not? That's a big one. And also just maybe you're rating it accurately, right? So you're saying I should have stopped +1ing things a long time ago. Is this a sign of, well, maybe you stop +1ing things, right? And the thing is, it might not be a sign of anything, because you're saying by the end of the mesocycle, we can translate this to say, by the end of the mesocycle, I feel a lot of accumulated fatigue. No shit, Lucas, you're supposed to have a lot of accumulated fatigue by the end of the meso. Like you could be at week 6 of 6 of your accumulation and be like, you guys, something's wrong. No fucking shit. If something's not wrong in week 6, it's not week 6, motherfucker, James.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sorry, I caught me with my mouth full. I think that's what you're supposed to feel. The thing is, you can't go back and retroactively say, like, did I do this right based on how I feel now? It's literally, how do you feel now? That's it. At the time, on each time course. So I think you're feeling the way you're supposed to feel, and that's great. And you're probably not doing anything wrong necessarily. You're supposed to feel overreached. What's the alternative? then you start progressing way less aggressively each time, and then you're probably underdosing your training more often than not. And then you have like you're too prepared at the end of the mesocycle and just not getting as much out of your training as you could be. So,
yep. All right. So, last question about being healed. That even though I'm not getting sore every time I train, I pretty much always get a pump. That's really good. Also, the sore that you on the temple referred to as in fact DOMS, correct? Or is there other tours of sore? It's almost always DOMS, but it can be like IOMS or later that day OMS. So any kind of like disruption to the muscle where you're like, ow, something's in there that's not supposed to be. That's soreness. Right? It can be the day after, it can be the day of, it can be right after, so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, like if you're sore at the time that you're training chest again, you do not rate that shit a +2. That's really the only thing. If you're still getting pumps, that's great. And if you still feel like shit, that's great because you're supposed to feel like shit in week 6.
Yeah.
More or less.
There's no getting around it, unfortunately.
So some people, what I've noticed is some people don't actually, how do I put this? Some people's soreness is not really, like they don't get sore, but their performance starts to slip down. That's why James and I are very, very sort of emphatic about saying, look, performance is always number one. Like if you're not matching your performance week to week, I don't give a fuck how not sore you're getting from your training. You are in excess of your MRV or under your MEV or something, right? So sometimes your soreness will be fine, but you start to stall out on performance. If that's the case, definitely you got to rate your shit fucking bad and you got to cut it off and, probably deal it. The fundamental fact of the matter is this. If you're healing on time, soreness-wise, and if your performance is stable or increasing, keep pumping up the volume, period.
Yep.
You feel like shit, but you're hitting PRs and you're healing on time, keep going.
Especially if you're hitting PRs, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a very difficult thing to say, okay, everything's great, I'm clearly healing in every measurable way, subjective and objective, I shouldn't add volume. Why not? You could be adding more volume and getting more jacked. Remember that the link between volume and hypertrophy is so goddamn airtight that if you have a non-volume equated study, it's basically garbage outside of some very specific concerns. So just remember that. Anytime you're like, ooh, I could have done 18 sets this week, but I only did 16, but every indicator told me I could have gone up, but I'm going to play it safe and not. Why? Why? You're literally missing out on growth. Right? All right. Fabiano Distlero says, hey, docs, thank you for the great advice from last week. I got one follow-up question and a couple of others. Regarding the advice, if not, of not coaching my girlfriend, where would you draw the line to coaching? How much advice / help shall I give? I guess pointing to qualified person or training programs is fine. Yeah, totally. Like, so when my current wife and I, currently wife, former girlfriend, former fiance and former girlfriend before that. Shut up, wife. She's back there talking shit. That's why I love
can
that.
hear her yelling.
Always talking that fucking nonsense. I'm going to get hit in the face later. Please send help. All right. When she and I first started dating, and for the first 2 years I started dating, I didn't give her dick for advice, but like she was just doing like, well, what the fuck was she doing? Like, maybe what was it? 5-3-1. She was doing 5-3-1 for like a year. And at some point she was like, it kind of feels like shit. And I was like, maybe you should try the Juggernaut method. That's all I said. So she tried the Juggernaut method and it worked super well. And she fucking hit like 10 PRs in the following year. So I wasn't like, hey, I should program your training. I actually never offered that. At some point she was just like, hey, do you just want to do my training? Because you seem to fucking know my body at this point. I was like, okay, cool. But that's the thing is like, I was just like, hey, you can try Juggernaut. And I was like, hey, honey, I'm a man. You should do Juggernaut because I know things. Like, no, fuck no. If she was still doing whatever the fuck at 5-3-1, I'd love her just the same. So it really just if she asks, throw it out there. If not, your job is to love your girlfriend and make sweet, sexy love to her when you're not making it to your own hand. It's not to coach her. And if that's your job, then you got 2 jobs to do, sometimes contradict each other.
Yeah, just let her come to you. Like if she has questions, you can absolutely answer them. And if she wants more in-depth stuff, like actual coaching at that point, then it came from her, and then you're helping her out, and then it's a good thing. But just don't basically like don't mansplain or don't like coach-splain to her if it's not well received. That's kind of the big idea.
Yep.
especially with fitness, because I think it's hard not to appear as like that weird like mansplaining thing because of the dickhead guys who always are in the gym trying to tell females like what they should or shouldn't be doing, or you know what I mean. It's those guys that make it hard for the rest of us who are trying to be well intentioned and help other people.
100%. Number 2, since I had the suicidal idea of starting a PhD in neuroscience 1 year ago, I would like to pick your mind on some of the research-related things. I admire principles of logic-focused way of thinking you guys practice. Also, one of us is married to a PhD in neuroscience, or about to be married, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Soon.
When working on a PhD, how do you manage different areas of your projects in terms of how much time and effort you spend on them per week? My main areas of priority are experiments, create meaningful data, analysis, programming, and other masochistic undertakings, read, learn, understand literature, maintain equipment, and others. Can you think of a working principles for a successful PhD? How much volume/time would you assign to either of these areas per week? When do you know you hit your MEV and MRV for, let's say, reading or programming in a day per week? James, hit it.
So this is a really great notion. Like the way that you're thinking about it is awesome, and I admire you for doing that. The problem is in the real world, this stuff is dictated to you by your PI in the lab, right? So your lab PI is going to tell you exactly how many experiments and tell you how much analysis and how many papers you're writing and how much time spent with mice that you're going to be doing. So this isn't something where you get to decide in a nice spreadsheet and say, okay, well, I'm going to allocate this much time to this. No, this is one of those where your PI says, this is what you're doing. Just do it, and that's it. There's not much discussion, right? And then you can divvy up your free time as you see fit. But like just looking at the examples you gave, right? Like experiments and analysis, like that's just outside of your control. If you have to do 80 hours a week, you're doing it. And then that leaves very little for other things. So I like where you're going because you're kind of applying the MRV idea to your job and your free time and your lifestyle, and that's awesome. I think that's great. But just know that when you get to the neuroscience stuff, and I know this because of Mel, your lab managers and PIs are going to tell you all these things. So don't think that you're going to have a lot of control necessarily. It's my point.
Yeah. And if you are in a lab where you have a ton of control, just do what is the most important things to get you to complete your PhD as the majority or biggest single blocks of your time. And then everything else needs to be spread accordingly. So like experiments create meaningful data. If it's number 1, you got to figure out how much of it you can reasonably do to put you on track to at the very least graduate on time. Then you do that much of it. That might be 50% of every week or most weeks. Then analyses, read, learn, understand literature, maintain equipment and others, maybe spread like a sixth or whatever to that or some shit like that, like, so that's kind of how it's got to be. Don't get too carried away. This sounds super fucked up, James. This doc told us this. Don't try to save the world in your PhD. Like reading, learning, and understanding literature is cool. The only thing fundamentally anyone gives a shit about is that you defend a dissertation. That's what gets you out of your PhD program so that you can read, learn, understand literature after that. I did a lot of reading, learning, and understanding literature during my PhD, so did James. But James and I got out of our PhDs on time. We did very well in them because we always knew that data collection, experiments that is, and analysis were number 1. So we got our data collected, we got it analyzed, and nobody ever tested us on whether or not we read, learned, understood other literature. I mean, barely. Like they do that in the qualitative examination, right? But like
that's part of your dissertation anyway. Like the literature that you're going to be reading is the stuff that you need to do to build your dissertation.
Exactly. So you're going to get that done anyway. Maintaining equipment, again, that's a lab manager thing.
Yeah.
Like it actually should not be your job to maintain equipment. Call me crazy. I don't know what kind of lab we're in. But.
Depends on your lab situation.
Yeah.
And if you have somebody who does that or not, or if you have like a bunch of asshole colleagues who just leave shit all over the place and then you have to end up cleaning it or whatever. But
yes, then do enough of that to keep shit going so you can continue to do your experiments. There you go. Yeah. Let's say any advice on how I can improve my knowledge in a scientific field, in my case, neuroscience. The general approach is to go from books/reviews to studies to discuss with other people. Is there a more principled way of doing this? Also, how do you take notes or organize new information? I often learn fast from reading and then forget in a matter of days and have nothing to review. This is actually an easy one. Read and then write your own sort of mini papers, summaries of your new knowledge. into like outlines, basically. This principle, this, that, and this is under that, and this is that, and this ties in like that. Teach it to yourself. And then, so you read a chapter and you make a chapter summary. You read a chapter, you make a chapter summary in your own words. Then you're going to learn a lot of shit. So don't just read stuff and just go, okay, I read it. That's fucking stupid. Read stuff, resynthesize it in your own words, and then you'll know a lot of shit. I would also recommend rereading and resynthesizing. A lot of the stuff I know the best, I've read like 5 or 6 times and synthesized 5 or 6 times. Then you really know the shit. One of the ways, people ask James and I, how the fuck come we know so much shit, can pull it offhand. James and I were professional, we still are to a large extent, we're professional educators for years. We literally had to stand in front of a classroom and teach the same fuck. James, how many times have you done the same basic strength and conditioning intro lecture? Maybe 8 times or something like that?
Fuck if I know. I can't keep track.
How can you fucking not know it? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So synthesizing it yourself, teaching it to yourself and to others is a great way to go. And absolutely start with general approaches. What I'll say is, how do you learn neuroscience well? You better know neurophysiology real goddamn well. And then build on top of that. Then go into network theory, know that really well, and then go into the grand architecture of specific networks here and there. A lot of people, I'll put it this way. Don't just go to Journal Club. Journal Club, I'm going to say, I fucking waiting a whole goddamn life to say this. Journal Club is an opportunity for fucking incel motherfuckers to try to get laid with other scientists, what they shouldn't be doing. Journal Club and beers. You don't learn a fucking thing. It's entertainment. It's purely, you might as well go to the movies. Okay? Reading a fucking paper and talking about it. And, oh, my professor's so cool and I love his beard. And, oh my God, he drinks beer. Oh my God, I don't know what these butterflies are. Fuck up out of my face. You do not learn in Journal Club. So stop reading random fucking articles. There is a more principled approach, which is learn things from the ground up. And then as you get into your specific area of research, then you read every goddamn article in that field. But these random bullshits from all over the place, that's for your entertainment. That's not part of your education. James.
Yeah, that was a fantastic answer. One thing I'll add, and you'll learn more about this because you're going to be becoming a neuroscientist. One of the things with learning is the spaced approach, or sometimes it's called different things, but basically when you're trying to learn new things, it seems to be a good idea to have short and frequent bouts rather than long extended marathon bouts. And sleep is also something that is inherently tied to learning. So never shortchange yourself on the sleep. And when you are reading or doing other learning activities, keep it like short and sweet. Think on it. And I love the suggestion Mike made about taking notes and chapter summaries. That was something that I did that with a lot of success as well. And just don't do the fucking cram sessions. It's mostly a waste. If you listen to Matthew Walker's book on sleep, it's really interesting about sleep in relationship to learning. It's actually a one-shot deal. So whatever you have been trying to learn that day, whatever information that you've been processing, if you fail to get good sleep on that day, you have basically wasted a lot of your time trying to learn whatever it is that for that day. It's like you get one shot to get it right, and if you don't get it, you miss out. So it's really interesting. So I would check that out, especially if you're a neuroscientist. Check out Matthew Walker's sleep stuff. It's really cool.
All right. From the galaxies, from the planets, even from the rings.
Jesus Christ.
Ansuman Radhakrishnan, a name that strikes fear. Hey, docs. Hope you're both doing well. I was just wondering what you guys think are the advantages of altering rep range focused mesocycle to mesocycle versus sticking with a specific distribution of rep ranges for most of a macrocycle with occasional shifts towards higher rep ranges of metabolite focus for a mesocycle. For example, approach number
We've
one.
answered this several times the last few weeks.
Focus on the 5 to 10 range. Meso 2 focus on the 10 to 20. Meso 3 focus on the 20 to 30. Even with these focused mesocycles, however, each body part would still have its training focused on the rep range that performs best in, just with shifts. Yep. There would still be interesting intensity progression since no rep range is excluded. Yep. Approach 2, focus each body part on its preferred rep range. They're all rep ranges trained. Meso 2, repeat of Meso 1. And then Meso 3, shift every body part more in the 20-30 range and reduce metabolite work. My understanding, approach 2 prioritizes specificity a bit more than approach 1. Just to really hammer each body part in the same rep range distribution, milking out direct adaptation. But forgoing some of the benefits of variation. Yep. Approach 1, I think balances specificity and variation a bit better. Imagine with approach 1, you might have to refigure MEVs, volume calculations, definitely intensity calculations more frequently. You actually don't have to do that because you keep the same exercises and keep them the same intensities. The new exercises you put in, you have to put in new rep ranges anyway, and you do that. whereas approach 2 just requires slight intensity and volume progression, so one meso to the next. What do you guys think would be the better approach? I think the approach right between those two. Really, approach 1 is the one right between those two. So there's something missing here from the analysis on Sermon that I think is going to be instructive. As you go from meso to meso to meso in a single block, you tend to generate a little bit of micro tearing that doesn't heal the entire time. You accumulate fatigue over the block in your connective tissues, which means that in pure hypertrophy training, if you can help it, your average intensity, average load per mesocycle could probably stand to not go up much or even drop meso to meso to meso, while your volume goes up a ton. Okay? What you don't want to do is do 2 high volume mesos and do your heaviest meso at the end of that, because then you've just put 2 high volume mesos of damage into your fucking tendons, and then you're doing super heavy weights in meso 3. So I think every mesocycle, the reason that we make it average a little bit lighter, now you still have exercises that thread through, like you might squat meso 1, meso 2, meso 3, you might squat in the 5 to 10 rep range all of those times. But in meso 2, you might add leg presses in the 10 to 20 range. In meso 3, you might add on top of those leg presses some lunges in the 20 to 30 range. So your average intensity divided by all of your sets might go down. And the way that is an advantage is that it basically reduces the chance of traumatic injury that occurs over the course. Now this is just a little bit of the preview. This shit is going to be covered in our book to a huge extent. I just wrote that chapter a little while ago on why there might be a good reason to progress in that meso the same way. Now, if you do approach 2 is at the end of the world, fuck no, you get almost exactly the same results. For very advanced athletes that are starting to get very strong, you probably don't want to pound. You probably can't, and James, maybe you could phrase this better than me, can't pound 2 successive mesos in a row of almost exclusively the 5 to 10 rep range, for example.
Oh, yeah. No.
Benefit the most. Like, you kind of have to just back off a little, or some of the volume adding that you do. It's not like you take away volume in the 5 to 10 rep range, but some of it that you add just has to be in a lighter range. Like, if you're doing, let's say, 3 sets on average of stiff-legged deadlifts to 400 pounds in meso 1, you're not going to do 6 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts at an average of 420 pounds in meso 2.
No.
You might do 4 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts at an average of 420, and then 2 stiff-legged deadlifts at an average of 300 pounds. Just back off and just do some volume, because otherwise you're going to fucking snap in half.
Yeah, and that might even be doing something like, like a deficit stiff-legged deadlift or wide grip or leg curls, right? Just some variations. Like, there's ways that you can kind of force that into happening. But yeah, I agree with you on that totally. Like, excuse me. You just can't. I mean, you can try, and I have tried many, many, many years. And then you realize that just doing the 5 to 10, you just end up accumulating a lot of wear and tear and a lot of just systemic fatigue. When if you just would have had a few 10 to 20 days throughout your meso, you probably could have pushed for longer and harder.
Yep. And remember that you say, well, strength training doesn't work like that. Strength training exactly works like that, because remember, strength training, as intensity goes up, volume goes down. In hypertrophy training, that's not the case. You're real fucked up trying to do the same rep ranges back to back to back in the same amount. Yeah. All right. So Chase of Face says, holy fuck. Hey, docs, my wife has suspected vaginal prolapse and has been instructed by a general practitioner to stop lifting while she waits to see a gynecologist. She was at the start of a cut, so this has raised a couple of questions. Number one, do you still think it's okay to go through with the cut, or should she switch to maintenance? Maintenance. Say this is a self-answering question, because if you do a cut without lifting weights, you will lose muscle. Number two, what would be some good activities to replace her 4 days of lifting with? No clue. That is up to her general practitioner to tell her, because James and I know about as much about vaginal prolapses as we know about horse fucking on YouTube videos, which actually is a lot. Well, let's give you some advice, because I've seen a lot of horse fucking on YouTube.
I'm on good behavior tonight. Don't tempt me. Get that shit out of my face.
Yeah. Sorry, Jay. We would love to help you, but unfortunately it's way outside of our expert area.
Yeah, I wish I could. I just got nothing for you.
Yeah. All right. It always says, I know this is likely to be about outside your realms of expertise, but any help with the greatest would be greatly appreciated. We'd love to help you, no joke, but we just have no fucking clue what the hell's going on. Don't do anything the doctor says is not a good idea. It's the only help I can give.
Yeah.
All right. Paul Postuma Montague says, hey, docs, Paul here again with the metal name. Haha.
It is a metal name.
In all fairness, my name is very weird, even where I'm from, the Netherlands. I got some questions regarding meso and microcycle programming based on some answers you gave in previous Q&As. As a reference, I am currently following the 5-day full body beginner intermediate MPT. This is my first time running it near the end of mesocycle 2.
Got it.
This and last meso, I increased most of my sets by 1 every week until 3, after which sets did not increase. So for a single exercise, the number of sets per week looked like 2, 3, 4, 4, 4, 4 deload. Day 1 has 3 chest exercises, and the MPT is increasing with all exercises with 1 set based on my rating for a total of 3 extra sets. The total sets for chest day on 1 therefore looks like 6, 9, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12 deload. Would it be better to not increase all 3 exercises 1 set per microcycle and spread out the volume increase a bit more? Hypothetically, absolutely. And that would be for more advanced digital products that will eventually release to do. But the male physique template is a fucking Excel spreadsheet, so that's all it does. If you can do better, you can sort of jury rig your fucking volume and just type in your own sets if you want. If you get more advanced, you can eventually do that. For now, I would say don't fuck with the template because it works pretty well, James.
Yeah, and what you're doing is also fine. It's not like you're doing something bad. I mean, like that model works just fine. I think you can tidy it up a little bit based on your individual needs. But I mean, if somebody sent that to me, I'd be like, yeah, that looks fine.
Yeah. Number 2, using the same example, I'm already doing 12 sets of chest in a single session in week 3. Dr. Mike previously stated that 10 sets is about the upper limit for a single muscle group per session. Any advice on how to tackle this? No advice at all. 12 is very much within what's just fine, as long as you're not experiencing any deleterious like stimulus to fatigue ratio where like your last 4 sets are just wastes of your time and you're just getting progressively more sore with no pump, right? So 12 is okay. Generally, in my lectures on this topic, I've gone so far as to say that in some cases, even 15 sets can work. And there's individual variation about this, right? So I think, if you're starting out with 8 sets per workout and you're ending up at 18 sets per workout, we got problems. If you're starting out at 6 and you're going to 12, boy, that just does not ring any alarm bells for me as long as you're recovering well and so on and so forth.
Yeah, same here.
And by the way, if 12 sets is too much in one session, probably affect your next session and make the rating go back down. So if it's not, then you're good.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was had in the back of my mind. Like by the time you have your next chest session, you'll know if 12 sets was too much.
Yep. Number 3, would overreaching in the last week before deload make sense? Absolutely.
Yep.
Same example as above. The MPT would have me do another 12 sets of chest on the 6th microcycle. Would it be a good idea to make this last session one with slightly higher volume? Not manually. Depends. Because the intensity is going up anyway, and your cumulative fatigue is already sky high. You're overreached anyway.
You still have to assess it honestly. You don't just make you can't overthink what the rating system is trying to do. So you can't say, well, it's my last week, so I should rate it falsely, right? No, you always just rate it accurately. Boom. That's it.
And then if you're ready for the overreach, it'll give you one. And if you're already super fucked up, then there's no need to overreach because you're already overreached.
Yeah.
Number 4, I understand that within one microcycle, you should not repeat the same exercises. You can repeat them, but maybe it's okay if you don't. But have some more variation. If you do exercise X with 5 to 10 rep range on day 1, would the same exercise X in the 10 to 20 range be counted as the same exercise or as another? I mean, I don't know if you. So I'm going to get a little soapboxy, and I don't mean to correct this. But when people say like counted to who? Is it God looking over your shoulder? Be like, oh, you counted that wrong. Counted to yourself, but remember, yourself is like there's nobody watching that shit, right? So you count it as the same exercise? No, of course, of course you count it as the same exercise. Is it an injection of an interesting form of variation in the form of loading variation? Yes. So to answer your question in a very charitable way, you count it as a different exercise, so to speak. Of course, it still counts as the same exercise, but it is a valid use of variation. So it's totally okay to do 5 to 10 on one day and 10 to 20 in the other. My training partners and I are literally doing a thing where we do Smith machine feet forward squats in the 5 to 10 range. Today, actually, we did it. And on Thursday, we're going to be doing the 10 to 20 range. Totally cool. Just know it for what it is and know it has limitations. It's not quite as big of a variant as using another movement altogether.
Yeah, so I mean, like to answer your question very cut and dry, right? If you see someone doing a bench press and then you see them doing a bench press with higher reps, is it still a bench press? Yes, it is. So I think you know that, right? But yeah,
also different reps are a form of variation. So you can feel free to do it. Just for example, if you're like, oh, my elbows hurt from benching, and then when I do it later for the 10 to 20 range, my elbows still hurt, but I thought it was a variant. Well, no fucking shit, but it's the same fucking exercise. Of course, it's going to re-hurt your elbows. But on the plus side, you could be like, man, benching 5 to 10, when I bench 10 to 20, it feels totally different, and I get a different pump and different parts of my. Well, that's great. That's how it's working.
Like my shoulders don't hurt anymore. Great.
Totally. All right, Martin McCoo.
McCoy.
Hey, Docs. Thanks for your feedback and input on last week's question. Short one this week. Mike, you recently said how you've played with light, medium, heavy, or more accurately, just increasing reps through a 3-day week per body part on Arrive Stronger podcast. Keen to try this with squats for leg dominant movement. I wanted your input on what to use for high reps. I'm in a sports performance gym, so I think CrossFit with the available equipment. Oh, okay. My quad movement is front squats, which isn't suited for high reps and have no leg press, leg extension machines. So we should just maybe Bulgarian, split squat, lunge, assisted pistols, landmine squats, and a few that come to mind. My choice would be various kinds of lunges and split squats. Specifically, walking lunges are ideal for high reps.
Belt squats are excellent for high reps too.
Yep, if you have a belt squat machine, it's sweet.
But you can, I mean, like I do a ghetto setup here in my garage. I just put like 2 bumpers on top of each other, and then I have like a weight belt, like with like a dip belt or whatever, and just pull the chain up into my dick as high as it will go, and I can get a full range of squat, and it works great.
Boom,
get some bruises on your legs, but whatever.
For sure. All right. Jorge Galeano Requena says, hello, Mike and James. I hope all is good. Some questions about different topics. Number one, what is your sincere opinion on EMS devices? Do they have a place in hypertrophy training? Can they heal or recover muscles faster? All these CrossFitters swear by them. Why? Because they're paid to do it as sponsored athletes. I own a complex units until now used from time to time to massage my dick. Oh, sorry, I read quads wrong. Although I can tell if it's really working. In the past, they used hypertrophy and strength programs, and I could really feel those get sore, but since I wasn't consistent enough, I also couldn't tell if it resulted in any gains, to be honest. James, can you please just take 30 seconds to boil this thing up?
Yeah, so if you look at the literature on recovery stuff, it's very tit for tat in terms of, is there an effect, is there not an effect? My opinion would be that if there is an effect, it's light at best, and you probably could get the same effect, if not a better effect, with traditional methods. In terms of generating hypertrophy, I don't think there's anything there. I think that only works in newbies who just get like a huge just activation stimulus at that point. There's nothing unique about the EMS units. They've actually shown that it's just the way that it activates the muscles is not all that different than the way that you would normally do it. So there's no distinct benefit. So I think it's just a dick wagging tool. It looks cool. I don't think that it really does anything though. I would say if I was to use the Revive criteria that we gave for critical thinking, my answer would be table it for later in that scenario.
All right. Last week I introduced a very small modification to my assisted pull-up technique that I guess resulted in a tremendous amount of soreness in my lats. It consists of the following. With hands in neutral position, I use the Versa grips to grip the handle, but this time instead of fully closing my hand with my fingers around the handle, I left the hand a bit softer and pushed my palms hard against the handle, and I focused on pulling with my elbows like I always do. Hope this makes sense, LOL. This was done RAR3, same as last week, which resulted in barely any soreness, but after this little variation, my lats, especially at the insertion, have hurted soreness obviously like shit for 2 days after the workout. How is it possible that a small variation has created so much damage? If you were wondering, I only added 2 sets this week to that session. So last time was 3 bent rows, 2 assisted pull-ups. This was 4 bent rows, 3 assisted pull-ups. You'd have to repeat this experiment a couple more times for me to be convinced that that's what caused it. It could just be random, could be other things in your workout, could be the volume additions, but such things can happen because of the mind-muscle connection we always fucking talk about. Sometimes people have said that treating their hands more like hooks rather than grips can really connect them to their back more. Some people swear by it, and I think that's a thing.
Yeah, and sometimes like when you get like joint pain, the joint pain you're experiencing now is a result of something you were doing like a month ago.
Yeah, sometimes it can be the case.
So a lot of the times that's the problem. So it might not even what you just did, like your workout, was just kind of like the final straw of like inflammatory action, right? And now it's like, yeah, we're done. Now you have tendonitis.
Yeah, there you go. Actually, related question: are muscle twitches, spasms, or fasciculations a sign that you train too hard? They are not a guaranteed sign, but if you're also training very hard and you start to get them more and more and more as your volume climbs, they are a sign that you're training. Maybe not too hard, but it's not a sustainable amount of training. So when you're overreaching with, you can expect some. If you get them all the time, it may be for different reasons, but if you understand that you get them mostly when you do a ton of work, don't do a mesocycle where you get them all the time because you will fuck yourself up.
Yeah, and if you are, you have to adjust your landmarks down.
Yep.
There's no way to fix it but that.
Number 4, is there any vegetable or fruit in terms of bang for your buck that's the best for health? Absolutely not. And I highly recommend reading the Understanding Healthy Eating book to learn that the idea that there is a fruit or vegetable best bang for your buck in terms of health is itself a myth. Variety is the spice of health in that regard, and there's not any superfood. There's superfoods don't exist.
If you ask a Brazilian, they might tell you açaí,
Porra, caralho.
which I love.
Luis Freilingsdorf. I read that right.
Very German.
Freilingsdorf. Hey, docs, during my last 3 hypercaloric mesocycles, I was periodizing my caffeine intake like this. Week 1, 0 milligrams. Week 2, 60 to 80. Week 3, 100 to 120. Week 4, 150. Week 5, 200 to 300. Week 6, DLO 0. Overall, it went pretty well. Within the 2 weeks of abstinence, I could resensitize myself to the dosages. Week 2 felt great. I used caffeine before every workout, 5 days per week. Most of them were in the day, or at least 8 hours before bed. What I noticed was that it masked the accumulating fatigue pretty well. During workouts, I always felt great. Therefore, pre and post training, not so much.
Yeah.
Performance was not decreasing. However, do you think someone could determine their fatigue levels while being sober, or is it okay to blast caffeine if performance isn't dropping? And what are your thoughts on caffeine periodization in general? Caffeine periodization is great. I think that caffeine can't save you from true overreaching. So if you're really fucked up, you're going to have shitty workouts no matter what. And I think that, recovery is just going to, so for example, that's why one of the cool reasons why we use both performance measures and soreness measures. Like if your DOMS is wild and you're always intersecting and overlapping DOMs, even if you're still performing just by the grace of caffeine itself, you're clearly not recovering. And as soon as you pull the caffeine, you're going to fold into fucking bits. So caffeine periodization needs to be in a measured sense, but also it's totally fine to use. James?
I agree with you. And this is not factual. This is just my opinion. But I find that like that week to week level of variation in your caffeine intake is just unnecessarily tedious. So I think like on a monthly scale, that's something that might be worth looking into and doing. And like Mike doesn't use a lot of caffeine. I do, right? And so you're coming from a caffeine pre-workout user here. I think you're just doing probably more analysis than you need, though. If it makes you happy and you're having good results, by all means go for it. But I think that probably on a month-to-month basis is probably better and just more practical. So you're not, it's bad enough when you got to measure your food and look at the food label and get your scale out. Like if you're having to do the same thing with your fucking caffeine, I don't know. For me, that's just too much. I'm not willing to go there, but I appreciate your attention to detail.
Yep. All right. Hey, docs, thanks for the great answer about the guy who is new to the gym. As I told James at the seminar, I showed him the RP Diet Book YouTube videos, which I really think he received well. He ordered whey protein, creatine, and caffeine pills, which is pretty solid as well, and he has started looking into nutrition. I just told him to have protein with each meal, fill up with veggies, because I think it's unnecessary for him to even bother with calories and macros. Yeah, totally.
Solid.
I also explained how not to be too caught up in looking cool looking labels on supplements which make them seem too good to be true, and he understands that as well. Now I think that's really good. He will disappoint you if he's like most people. I'm just kidding. I'm real jaded. Now to a question. The same guy takes melatonin every night. I think it's actually prescribed to him or something. And for some late workouts, he wants to take caffeine pills. Do you think this could be a problem?
Yes.
If I understand correctly, caffeine blocks the melatonin buildup in your body. So if there's a problem with supplementing melatonin after taking the caffeine, like does the caffeine induce supplementation, or would he be fine? James?
It's just a generally bad idea, just from it, regardless of the caffeine and melatonin interaction. Caffeine and taking at night for workouts is just a bad idea because it's going to keep you awake either way. So one thing that's interesting to note about melatonin is most of the melatonin that you get over the counter is usually rotten, expired, and doesn't do what it's meant to do. Some of it is okay, most of it isn't. If you get like a prescription-based thing, that's usually better. If you get like pharmacy grade, stuff, it's usually good. That's not necessarily something you should be taking every night. That should be something you take on a sort of a needs basis. Mel and I have this discussion very often, but I would not do that. I would say I'm not entirely sure if caffeine blocks the melatonin buildup. I know caffeine blocks a lot of the natural. There is a chemical that accumulates throughout. It's ADP. It's ADP builds up throughout the day in your brain, and when ADP builds up, you get your natural circadian fatigue responses, at least partially. And caffeine kind of blocks that. And then once that caffeine goes away, you get the ADP dump, and that's the crash that you usually feel, the fatigue. So I just wouldn't do that on the simple basis of caffeine late at nights, contraindicated for sleep purposes, regardless of the drug interaction.
Yep. All right. Chris Griffo.
It's a familiar name. Is that Chris Griffo from Temple that we taught?
Yep, sure is.
Mm.
Hello, for a 25-year-old male MMA athlete, Chris, for me, is there a benefit in eating less carbs in the morning to prevent drops in testosterone levels? Would the improved recovery mechanism of carb be more beneficial? The literature on carbs dropping testosterone levels is by no means clear, and probably drop it because the test actually goes into your cells instead of floating. It's just total bullshit, Chris. So carbs don't drop your test levels. That's number one. Number two, how many grams of carbs per pound of body weight should I look to consume 24 hours prior to an event? That's actually
It's hard to answer.
The RP Diet 2.0 book as far as general recommendations, but you'd have to play around with a variety of things depending on what event, depending on how you respond to carbs, depending on what you're doing with your water, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
If you want a super general recommendation, at least 2.
After you weigh in.
Yeah, 2 to 4. Yeah, not before. Number 3, in addition to upon rounds of live training, would you implement lactate threshold training via hill sprints, track work, repeats of 200s, 400s, 1600s, 800s, 1600s, or 3200s, or spin bike to an MMA athlete's training plan? Granted, they have good running cycling technique. How would you structure it 3 months away from a tournament versus 2 weeks away?
I would only do that if they have real dog shit conditioning, or if it's clear, like if they can do low intensity stuff, like if they're good at jogging, but as soon as they get into sparring, like anything that's relatively intense, they just kind of crash and burn right away. Maybe. I still think that the best way of getting that type of conditioning will be through your combat derivatives, whether it's wrestling, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing. Now, granted,
shadow boxing is fucking hard if you do it right.
Yeah. Now, granted, like there are fatigue limitations. Like you can't just hit a bag all day. You can't live spar. You can't grapple all day. So there is a need to stay in shape throughout the year so you don't run into this conundrum. But if you're dealing with somebody who is struggling with their conditioning, you can supplement with some of those things. I would mostly stick to interval style training. I wouldn't necessarily, so like hill sprints and repeats is not really lactate threshold training because you're not actually maintaining the lactate threshold. You're essentially just doing sprint training more or less. But I think that interval training, whether it's running or something, what I would actually recommend is the assault bike is really good for MMA because of all the muscle mass that you use. So like doing interval work on the assault bike or a rowing machine, elliptical. I'm gonna regret saying this, but even the Versa Climber, if you got one, is better than maybe just running because of at least from the perspective of using the muscles in a more similar way. Because like you never fucking run in an MMA fight. Right now you can get really fucking good at running and get really economical and push a good pace, but that's not going to pay out as much specific dividends. It's only going to have some very general carryover to your MMA stuff. So with MMA, you're going to be using a lot of muscle mass, a lot of pushing and pulling, a lot of isometrics. You can integrate some modalities like that. That'd probably be better.
Yeah. Number 4, my match is the fatigue. I'm sorry.
Sorry, last one. How would you structure it 3 months away from a tournament versus 2 weeks away? 2 weeks away, you wouldn't be doing it at all. You would 2 weeks away, you'd probably take your last hard spar somewhere around the 2 week or 1.5 week mark. You would not be doing any supplemental conditioning. I would only be doing it probably 3 to 4 months away from an expected contest, and then at some point you're going to have to transition to your sparring based cardio stuff. And if it's not there, that means you just did a shitty job in your off season, frankly. Not you specifically, I'm just saying your athlete is probably did a bad job maintaining their conditioning, and you're just going to have to pick it up on the next go.
Number 4, my matches, the fatigue which hinders me the most is my legs getting heavy or my grips frying. In addition to becoming more technical and efficient, what kind of training can help me feel fresh? I think James's stuff with the sprints on the bike can help with legs and just more specific work. Various derivative drills in your sport. As far as enhancing your grips fry almost exclusively due to technical strategic errors. And my grips used to fry a ton when I was a white belt, blue belt, and when I got my purple belt and so on and so forth, my grips almost never fry. Why? Because you tend to overuse your grips when you freak out, and stop freaking out and don't overuse your. I don't even remember the last time my grips fried, and I've been in tournaments and tons of crazy live rolls, and my grips are fine because I don't overuse them. Grips frying is almost always an overuse, tactically at the time, overuse. You're just grabbing shit for no reason.
So aside from the tactical errors there, right, like legs and grips fatiguing out is literally a work capacity issue. So you literally
That's
don't
for
have.
everyone.
Yeah, and it's not to say that you're doing a bad job. Everyone's going to feel that, but you could go back and look at it. You could, if you're doing your needs analysis for an upcoming competition cycle, you could say, okay, like I get that everyone struggles there, but this was limiting. I couldn't hold on to anything. I couldn't get subs, and I couldn't throw kicks, or my footwork was really shitty because my legs were so heavy. Then you would really work on building the work capacity in your forearms and your legs in particular as one of the big milestones for the upcoming cycle that you're planning.
Yeah. And one of the ways to do that, I guess, if you're looking for grips, is make sure to assert your grips early and reassert your grips all the time in your rolls, and work on doing that. And then when you have to do it in training or in live competition, you'll be used to it.
Mm-hmm.
Max Jenkins says, "Hello, docs. I wanted to ask you guys if either of you have any experience or advice regarding periodization of off-season weight training, specifically for skiing and ski racing." Nope. Obviously, I'm strongly prioritizing my legs, lol. However, do you guys think I should focus on a specific rep range? Personally, I would think that because ski racers are subject to a high degree of force and need to exhibit a decent level of muscular endurance, the entire spectrum of fiber should be trained somewhat regularly. Does this logic seem sound? I'm currently taking specific blocks of time to focus on different rep ranges. But is there something else you guys think I should making sure to have in my training, or maybe something to avoid? The events I focus are the GS and slalom. Thanks as always. The limited amount I know, I think you should probably focus mostly on strength and power, because a lot of that endurance stuff comes from training your actual events. But James,
yeah, and like the good news is for you, GS and slalom aren't like super endurance heavy events. In fact, they're probably more strength and power focused because of the sharp movements that you have to make, and you're going downhill, right? So it's a lot of leg strength. So the good news for skiing, aside from as long as we're excluding cross country skiing, is it would follow basically the same general periodization rep scheme as most strength power sports would, which would be like, you have like your 10s phase, 5s phase, 3s phase as you get closer and closer to competition. So same stuff, more or less.
Josh Bradshaw says, Dr. Mike and Dr. James, upon finishing a mesocycle, what assessments do you take before making changes or small adjustments to the following mesocycle, i.e. performance markers? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So all of your reps and weights are tracked. Enjoyment, I don't know.
No.
If you're serious about it and you want results. Level of recovery of individual muscles, definitely. That should be data that's already apparent every single workout and week. Adjusting volume, etc. All your volume should be tracked. So you basically, here's the huge kicker. By the time you finish your accumulation phase, you should have already not only collected almost all the data that's pertinent, but become intimate with that data and already derived future recommendations from it. That there's not like, okay, I finished, now what? It's like, as soon as you finish your last day, you're like, I know exactly what I need to do this next meso, because everything has been staring and re-staring me in the face. Does that make sense, James?
Absolutely. And it should be painfully apparent, right? Where it's like, okay, that particular thing, like that setup went really well and this one sucked. I really need to dial this one back, or I need to split this up into 2 days because this workout took 3 hours or whatever. But don't overthink it. Like these are like the volume, the recovery. God, that's like 90% of the way there. The rest of it is just fluff. Like, did you have a good day kind of stuff?
Yep. P.S. Subscribed to Tarpy Plus a couple of months ago, but I've been a long-time follower of you guys, loving the content so far. Thanks in advance, Josh. You're welcome. Who says, what things do you consider success at the end of a block personally and or with previous clients? So with clients, you sometimes get the block all at once. What you look at is progress and fatigue ratings. It's essentially look at stimulus to fatigue ratio, right? And if you look at it, there's been not so much progress in certain areas, but the fatigue ratings are really high, you look at reconsidering the approach. If you see that there's a ton of progress and the fatigue ratings are relatively low concomitantly to that progress, then you're doing a good job and probably don't change a whole lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you make this, it's more of a block. And when we use block, we're talking about kind of like a series of mesocycles put together, because a lot of the times you don't really get a ton of good feedback. And not to say that people are giving you bad feedback, but like if you do one meso of training, by the end, they are really kind of starting to get into a really good groove with it, but they have just kind of started to figure things out. What you want to know is like, okay, after meso 2, how did you really feel? And then they'll say, man, this was like a really awesome, like the they'll say something to the tune of like this particular squat variation I really got into a good groove with, and I was really feeling it in that 10 to 20 range. But when we were doing 5 to 10, it just felt like shit and awkward. And you'll get more like when they have a kind of a time series of doing relatively close to the same things, you'll get more good feedback from them. One meso at a time, you'll get some volume stuff, you'll get some general fatigue stuff, which is still important, but some of the more individualization stuff you won't quite get yet.
Yep. All right, Kevin Farley says, hey docs, I shockingly have a question. Could you put the subject to bed once and for all? I'm talking about IFYM and the RP Diet app. Me like you, the kids cereal and whey isolate combat post-workout, specifically in the form of a good chocolate peanut butter isolate and Kellogg's Cocoa Krispies. Fuck yeah, motherfuckers. You know what I'm talking about, that good shit.
Does sound good.
Kevin, are you slanging that fucking shit? It does help that I currently get 75 grams of carbs post-workout in this cut, and the high glycemic carbs do not affect my hunger levels. I know this post-workout combo will change later on once I get deeper in the cut, but for now it's working well. Now I've been talking to people on the RP Facebook group. Mistake number one. I'm just kidding.
No, for real.
Here and there about this exact subject, about this exact subject, and some say do IFYM and the app can be used, but if you're going to do it like you would with the templates where it has to match up perfectly for calories and macros. The other half are doing IFYM with the app to the brutality of the Crusades.
I'm not sure.
Appreciate the answer, guys. At the end of the day, we're all just trying to be muscular chads with massive quads so the incels can feel inadequate.
For sure.
That's a trick question because the incels are already feeling inadequate. I think that we're super fucking splitting hairs, dude. You just IFYM it to the app and like just get this fucking within 5 grams of the shit. 5 grams of protein, within 5 grams of carbs, 5 grams of fats. Nobody's ever lost a fucking Mr. Olympia doing that. So whatever your goals are, you're fucking golden. There's that put to bed.
Yeah, and I would say like if you want to use IFYM, every now and again or for specific situations, that's fine. I would say don't go. So like if you get the app and it makes you this diet, and your immediate thought is like, I'm just going to IFYM this shit every day, then don't use the fucking app. Just do your own thing because you're basically changing the whole thing at that point. So why bother? You know what I mean? And I'm not attacking you. I'm just that's like a bad mindset for people to have. Like. Like
we've actually had people comment. It's very rare because the app has actually super great ratings, but some of the negative reviews are. I want to type in my own macros to this. Dickhole, that's a whole different. That's what MyFitnessPal is. We're not trying to replace MyFitnessPal. Go do that.
Yeah, and like, why did you get the app if you want to type in your own macros? It's just you got it, so it would do it for you.
It's totally cool based on a couple of foods that aren't on the app. Eventually, we'll have like barcode scanning and everything, so you can do that to your heart's fucking content. But for now,
yeah.
If it's a big pain in the ass to IFYM it, just do your own thing. And if you like it, it's totally fine. All right. Joshua Brown says, asking the right questions always seems to be the hardest part. Intensity has a high priority for powerlifting. If an athlete's performance with high relative intensities fades quickly, how should the program respond? For example, a top set, then 3 or less drop sets with a similar reps at roughly 10% less intensity. Is the answer to drop the intensity further down, move to an exercise that the athlete can perform with sufficient loads or reps, or simply, so the exercise thing is not an option because in powerlifting, you're constrained to the exercises you can do. So we'll rule that out immediately. Or simply perform fewer reps per set at the intensity chosen at the top set. That is my number one recommendation.
Yeah.
Let the reps drop, keep the intensity up. But if the reps get to like singles or below, then you have to drop intensity. Drop it as little as you can to get the work that you need. For clarification, no recovery issues or other interfering training stimulus. Appreciate any feedback. Yeah. So it's better to do 4-3-2 reps in 3 sets than to do 4-4-4 reps but drop the load every time as far as powerlifting is concerned, because maximizing intensity in hard sets is number one.
So for powerlifting specifically, this is a great question, Josh, so don't take this the wrong way. For powerlifting, when you run into this scenario, it means one of 2 things or possibly both of these things happened. The absolute intensity is just too high given the stimulus that you planned on providing, or you are going too hard on a relative intensity. So meaning you're not leaving enough in the tank, essentially. So it's probably one of those 2 things where you said, okay, you should be getting sets of 5 at this weight. Their reps are dropping off. The weight's just too heavy. That's probably the first thing. The second thing is instead of leaving 2 reps in the tank, they went to 0 on the first set, and now their reps are tanking as a result. So those are just 2 things to keep an eye out for. It happens more often than you might think, even if you're being cognizant of these things. Those are like the 2 big culprits. And then if it does happen, which it does from time to time, what Mike said, keep the intensity and just do less reps. That's going to be the the big adjustment.
All right, Felipe Machado comes in and says, "What's up, docs? I've written a few things to try to explain to myself a few concepts, and I intended to modify it to a question format before posting it here, but as I haven't had the time to do it yet, I'll just post some parts of it as I've written. Could you please correct me and check if I'm on the right track?" Totally.
Well,
My main question. Go ahead.
let's. I don't want to like read like like notes to self and then critique all the notes to self. Let's try and keep it constrained to a question, Felipe, if you don't mind.
So Felipe, next time make questions for us, but we'll do this time because we love you, dog. But we're just going to breeze through it. If something jumps out at us that's terrible, we're going to comment on it. But if things seem relatively good, then we're going to say it's cool. My main question is mostly when it's time to switch exercises within a training session, but I'm going to have to copy different parts of the text to show you where I'm coming from. Theoretically, if fatigue wasn't a constraining variable, the amount of stimulus necessary to reach certain volume landmark be achieved with countless arrangements of stresses in any unit time, exercise training session, a microcycle. That would mean that as far as stressor is just specific enough, it could be performed enough times to achieve the required stimulus, therefore the desired volume load. Of course, agreed so far. One of the practical problems is that the next exercise training session, a micro volume load, is predicated on how much fatigue and stimulus were presented to reach the previous target volume load. Exactly, especially how much fatigue. That means the amount of stimulus one is able to present at a given time frame is constrained by the amount of fatigue one is exposed to, not only in that time frame, but in the whole period between deloads, kind of how much stimulus you can fit in a given time frame without extrapolating the fatigue limit. That's true. You're actually deriving the SFR principle or SFR concept. The amount of stimulus one should present is also constrained by training principles, mostly by overload of specificity. Because the MRV is grounded on the fatigue generation of given stresses, the MEV and MEV and its stimulus, using the highest SFR exercises and training programs allows MEV to MRV window to open up, correct, while MEV rises more slowly, yep, therefore allowing less stress to produce more stimulus for a longer period, which also reflects in less fatigue generation per any unit time. On the other hand, achieving the required volume load with a very low SFR would result in MEV rise and MRV drop in a given time frame, especially an MRV drop as fatigue accumulates.
Yeah.
In other words, the optimal scenario always requires achieving the target volume load with the highest SFR as possible at any unit time, exercise training session, microcycle, mesocycle. Correct.
Yeah.
Exercise selection for muscle group in a more theoretical manner to start addressing the point of exercise selection for muscle group and when to go to another exercise within that training session. The SFR curves for a given exercise has to be seen as a quasi-bell curve, which has its peak dependent on the exercise itself. More disruptive exercise generally peaks slightly faster. Maybe you're just using raw stimulus there, not SFR. How much stress was previously generated, previous levels of stimulus and fatigue reflects how SFR curves would look like. The more fatigue previously attained, the faster the already higher fatigue levels. Okay, everything after that is very, very speculative. I don't want to speculate on it. I don't want to be put on the spot on it. Maybe, but come back with more specific questions on these particulars. I'd have to give that some more thought.
Yeah, and you could also be like, I think he's talking about basically like systemic fatigue at this point, but that
totally
right. So you could differentiate that and say that's not true at the local level,
right?
Feasibly, but we don't know.
Yeah, the level of advancement of the trainee, the more advanced, longer it takes to achieve the SFR peak. Maybe not. Could be quicker because SFR peak of set to set to set could be achieved by advanced individuals quite fast, because they have a mind-muscle connection that's really awesome. Like it might take you 2 sets of squats to be in the zone if you're advanced. If you're a beginner, it might take you 5 or never. You just actually get better SFR the longer you train. Individual differences. With that in mind, does it mean that another exercise should be introduced after the former achieves its SFR peak? So pause right there. There's actually something we need to consider other than SFR. It is the diversity of stimulus to various muscle parts. So for example, your bent row SFR can continue to be awesome, but you might switch to lat pull downs because you want to hit a different part of your back. So that also has to be considered, right? Technically speaking, it's not that one exercise achieves SFR peak. We want SFR area under the curve to be maximized, okay? So SFR peak would only take you to when SFR gets really the best, and then you cut it off. That's not a good idea. So what you generally want to do is start an exercise, continue to do it. If you're just thinking of SFR, continue to do it until its SFR hits the peak and then falls off maybe halfway and then stop and then go on to the next exercise. Hopefully that makes sense. What you want to avoid is the tails of SFR where it starts to get really low, but you don't want to cut off a good chunk of meat. Let me give you a really good analogy. You want to eat the middle parts of the bread loaf and maybe throw away the little cores at the end, right? But like the peak, the biggest bread loaf peak, that's not where you stop eating the bread. you might get halfway until the core and then give the rest to the dog. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's that. Sorry for the long question. I'm going to break it into a few parts to post it in other days. Great. So we get the same question twice. By the way, in the last Q&A, I had a similar question, but the mistake was that I matched the volume load curves with SFR. One's actually FSR. Now I can see way more clearly how they play out, and it's not as I had visualized. Thanks very much, guys. Yeah. Felipe, as soon as you get us very distinct, clear questions about distinct concepts, I mean, all the stuff you're saying sounds generally correct, but I can't be sure, James and I can't be sure if you're thinking about it exactly correctly based on your application. So I got a mission for you, some homework. Give us an example of two different things, two different ideas you have, or correct idea that you think is correct, and maybe an alternative hypothesis that maybe is not correct. Give us an example of how you think that plays out and ask us which one is probably the case. We'll very much be able to help that.
Yeah, solid.
Cool. All right. Mercia Balai. We're going to use your American pronunciation. Hey, docs, long-ass question ahead. Yeah, right. Felipe Machado went before. Your shit's not long.
Huh.
I was listening to the latest Improvement Season podcast with Steve, and he brought up an interesting issue. The hypothesis that gains can still be made in the early stages of a cut because they're just the realization of processes started in the previous mass phase was also discussed in the latest Arrive Stronger podcast with Dr. Mike. This can also reinforce the benefits of a maintenance phase because more of the previous gains can be cemented in an isocaloric environment than in a hypocaloric one. But the interesting idea would be to replace the maintenance phase with another mass meso. In the hypercaloric environment and higher volume environment, all of the previous gains can be cemented, even if the P ratio, law of diminishing returns would mean that little new gains would be made during this period. The only downside would be that there is no resensitization to high volumes. That's a big fucking downside, dude.
Yeah, and you'd still be gaining weight, which is another big down.
So you'd be getting really fat. But let's say that the volumes would be tolerable during this last mass phase. You could just take an extended deload if needed, 10 to 14 days instead of traditional week. After this, you directly start your cut at your hypocaloric MEV, which would resemble starting volumes of the previous mass meso, if not slightly higher. This would be a valid argument. Would this be a valid argument to take a short-ish last massing meso with an extended deload before cutting instead of traditional maintenance cut? I mean, I think that comes down to the question of, do you think a maintenance phase is necessary, or do you think a long deload can do the job? I think a maintenance phase is necessary to resensitize to volume and also to psychologically desensitize to the brutality ahead. Your diet needs to be resensitized. Like, you're not pushing calories all the time for no goddamn reason, one way or another. So I think maintenance phases, for a list that is extensive and will appear in the hypertrophy book and actually appears in all of our books, is a good idea. And I don't think an extended deload is the way to do it. And like James said, it's just that mass phase is an opportunity for you to get fatter for no good goddamn reason.
And also just keep in mind, like, yes, so there is like a delayed effect of a lot of the gains that you make. So a lot of the times they don't manifest for weeks or maybe even months afterwards for a variety of reasons. Some of them just take a while. But this is a constant throughout all of training. It always is happening this way. So as long as you keep training, you're always kind of reaping the benefits of the last mesos training right now. So my point here being that you shouldn't necessarily change the structure of what you're doing with this in mind, because this is just a constant over time. So you can kind of just factor it out. It's a wash in the long term.
Yep. All right. Steve Blair says, ahoy hoy, docs.
Oi.
Oi. After 2 successful basic hypertrophy blocks, I'm going to venture into the world of higher up training and metabolites. Having never really done sets of reps above 12 before, it should be an interesting experience. Damn straight. I'll be doing higher reps with shorter rest for compounds and rest pause for assistance movements. I've done quite a few questions. I have quite a few questions, though, not quite Jan Fries level, but getting close. Number one, in a higher rep plus metabolite phase, would MEV and other volume landmarks change much? Potentially.
Maybe.
That's why we auto-regulate them. I work out at home with limited equipment, so I'll be keeping the same exercises. The only thing I will change is the rep range and rest times. I noticed the starting sets in the MPT templates change slightly when moving into the metabolite phase, but I can't quite figure out why some nudge up a bit and some go down. Yeah, that's just our best guess at averages, so you can do way better just by auto-regulating it. Translation, when you start to get a big-ass pump, stop. And figure out how sore you get and then adjust from there. After your first week, you'll know where your MEVs are.
A very general rule, and this is don't take this out of context. This is just kind of a help you get started. When you're going from like 5 to 10 and then you're making a jump to like 10 to 20 or metabolite stuff, as the intensity absolute, so the weight on the bar for any given exercise goes down, you can usually increase the sets by 1 or 2. So basically your MEV goes up because the intensity has been adjusted down so much. So doing sets of 15 is substantially different than doing sets of 8 in terms of the load. You can usually give 1 or 2 sets of a bump. Some, not always, but more often than not, if it's the same exercise.
Number 2, I know the effectiveness of metabolite training drops quite quickly. Is this why MPT metabolite phase is only 4 weeks and the basic hypertrophy blocks are 6? Yep. If I got to week 4 and still felt fresh, would it be okay to push on an extra week or 2? Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly as it would for basic hypertrophy blocks, or do the benefits of metabolite work drop off quickly? No, the benefits are very obvious when they drop off. You just stop getting big pumps.
Yeah. But like extending, yeah, if even if you're, it's not going to cause you any harm to extend another week or 2 or something like that. Like even if you're petering out your gains from the metabolite phase, at worst you'll be maintaining at that point.
But it'll be pretty obvious at that point. Number 3, if using shorter rest for phases as advised in APT guidelines, would the number of exercises per session of a given body part have any effect on the results? For example, 4 sets of squats with 90 seconds rest between seems like it would give a different effect to 2 sets of squats followed by 2 sets of leg press, since you'd have much longer rest between 2 and 3 while you change equipment. Would it be preferable to use less variation?
Nitpicky stuff. Rest
per session to keep all the rest periods short. I will say this. You should be using the same amount of rational variation as always. 1 to 3 exercises per muscle group per session. Within that, I think you're totally fine. If you start getting into fuckery where you use, I will say this. There's a lot of bodybuilders that do a lot of metabolite work, and they do 6 exercises. So most of the shit is warming up. And then they do 1 metabolite set and they go. That's fucking stupid, so don't do that. But if you can, hypothetically, use only 2 exercises instead of 3 in a metabolite phase, that boom, 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 that could be a good thing. So consider it. What I do, this is almost a self-solving problem because remember, metabolite training is so light that your warming up probably just won't take that long. But yeah, if you have an exercise that you warm up a shitload for, don't do it as a second exercise. Use your exercise that you warm up a shitload for first, and then do the one you don't have to later. For example, don't do lunges first and then do squats in a metabolite phase, because lunges you can get to going pretty quickly, especially with lighter weight. But squats you might have to warm up for a couple sets. Warm up, do your squats, then do lunges back to back to back to back to back, die, and just go home. What's weird is when people do, and this is a valid concern, doing a metabolite phase where you're all right, drop set of cable flies, and then I warm up slowly for the bench press and do sets of 10. Don't do that.
Yeah. And
then you lose the metabolites. So pretty straightforward.
And also, I don't really feel like you need to be tracking your rest time in between exercises unless, you're just trying to be orderly and efficient. But I think that's
when you can breathe again and your lactate is not preventing you from walking, hit it again.
Yeah, I mean, because you might say okay, I'm gonna do some squats and then I'm gonna go do some high rep leg presses afterwards. If you just take less than 1 minute and then you go right into the leg presses, you might have actually just ruined what you could have done in that leg press session. Despite the whatever metabolite benefit you might be getting from the short rest between exercises, maybe you would have had a 2-fold metabolite effect just taking a minute and then having a fucking amazing leg press session after that. So.
Number 4, the MPT FAQ suggests that anything over 10 reps is fine for the metabolite phase. However, on the webinar a few weeks ago, you used 15 as the minimum for the first set. Have your views changed, or am I getting mixed up on what you were talking about? Our views have not changed. The MPT FAQ is a very, very general document. So if we have to be more specific, the answer is 15. If we have to be general, the answer is 10. But if it's 10 reps, you're totally fucking golden. Also, in the context of the MPT, some of that stuff is supposed to just be normal training and then the metabolite stuff on top of that. So we'd be very specific. The metabolite stuff is, the stuff over 15, arguably even over 20, right? But then the 10 stuff is just a hard cutoff. If it's less than 10 reps on your first set, then you're definitely not a metabolite phase.
That's exactly
it's just different levels of specificity.
It's not meant to say 10 reps is metabolite training. It's saying less than 10 reps is no longer metabolite training.
Yeah. Number 5, my arms seem to fatigue very quickly for some reason. With short masturbation problem. With short rests or with supersets, I can see my triceps really limiting my pushing movements. Is the solution just tactical exercise selection? Does that mean that my arms need the extra work? And I should just let my triceps take the hit and it'll balance out in the long term? Either and both. So I remember, your job is not to make your arms less fatigable. Your job is to get them to grow. Just train them how they grow. And then if your chest or whatever, your back are really fucked by your arms, then change exercise selections and do more isolation work for your chest prior to compound movements, and your back, same thing. And that way you will obviate that problem.
Yeah, and sometimes like the extra work notion of like, oh, well, that's just like a weak or a lagging body part, so maybe I should just need to suck it up and take the extra work. Well, maybe not. Maybe you're actually that much extra work is starting to provide not only diminishing returns, but possibly even negative returns. So if your triceps are still fucked and you're trying to do all this other pressing stuff, and you're like, well, I just got to get that extra pressing volume in for my triceps, that might actually be doing you a disservice. So it can go both directions. So it's hard to answer like with a real concise answer on that one.
Yeah.
So volume landmarks. So my point is volume landmarks, right? We just figure out what do I need to get, what are my best gains for triceps at this point, and if I do more than that, I'm probably doing myself a disservice. Less than that, same thing.
Yep. Which is where those isolations for back and chest come in. You can avoid fucking your biceps and triceps over. Number 6, I can only hit about 12 bodyweight chin-ups and have no access to a machine to assist me to hit high rep numbers. Do you have any preferred strategies for more metabolite type chin-up pull-up training? Total rep goal rather than number of sets is not a form of metabolite training, or rest pause is not a form of metabolite training, or just keeping it simple and switching to pull downs is definitely a form of metabolite training. Do that, or band assisted, but really pull downs is.
I've tried. I can't get the metabolite going for the lat pulling variations. It just doesn't seem to be a good fit. I have some female clients who I've done that with, and it seems to work okay. Male clients, once you're a male intermediate, like metabolite for lat is just a forearm exercise, even with straps.
They work okay. Yeah, for rows they work okay for pull downs and stuff. I mean,
so?
Just short rest sets. For rows, for me, not for barbell rows. Just for machine rows, I think they work okay, especially with top holds. And for lat pull downs and stuff, I've been able to do some metabolite stuff, but it's really like just we stated before, the metabolite stuff just doesn't work that great for back.
Yeah, I've struggled with that. Some female clients have had a good result, but for males, mostly not.
Yeah. Number 7, my hypertrophy blocks have shown I have a quite low MEV and a high MRV. Welcome to the club of being awesome. So the difference in volume between the first and last weeks of a meso was quite large. Training 6 days a week keeps the later sessions manageable, but does that mean in the first few weeks the sessions are really short? Moving to shorter rest periods means these sessions will get even shorter. I know for consistency/habit, you've said the changing schedule mid-meso is probably a bad idea, but if adherence isn't an issue, would you see any issue with starting a meso 5 days a week, then moving to 6 days once the volumes start to climb? This would also help keep the per session volume part in the advice to do 10 range rather than having some movement start at 2 sets per set. I think it's fine as long as you really know what you're doing. You don't fuck yourself over. James?
I am not in favor of that, but only for personal reasons. The only thing I would say is when you make those types of switches, it becomes very difficult to track, because now not only are your training sessions changed, but your training sessions in relation to your circadian rhythms have changed as well. So like if you always squat on Tuesday, then you know that you're going to be carrying some of that on Wednesday and Thursday. Well, now if you change that, or you change the other days, those are going to be thrown off as well. So just keep that in mind. So I don't think it's a terrible situation, but I would not do that.
Yeah. Number 8, does calorie expenditure change much in metabolite blocks? I'd imagine since the number of sets are similar, it wouldn't make much of a difference, but I thought I'd check. Nope. Very little. Again, remember, you don't burn a lot of calories weight training anyway, so it's a moot point.
Yeah.
Timothy Schultz says, hey, docs, 2 questions. I'm cutting my only realistic
statement. Tim.
That's true. Everything needs to have a question mark after it. My only realistic time to train on weeknights is about 8:30 p.m., finishing around 10 with bedtime at 11. The app tells me to have a big post-workout meal with about 1/3 of daily carbs. But if it were midday, I would go with some whey and sugary cereal. But since it's pre-bedtime, should I go with some casein and some slower carbs or some different mix, or am I overthinking? Way fucking overthinking. Just do what you like and make sure you don't get an upset tummy, and then you can still fall asleep and you're good to go.
Do casein and sugary cereal.
Yeah.
Just have at it.
Disgusting. I would say the best bet is actually just to eat some lean meat and some like rice or pasta. Something in the middle is probably good.
Yeah.
That's to get real nitpicky. I read several weeks ago that I have kyphosis, which was not really the proper way to describe what I have. I just have rounded shoulders, and one shoulder sits about an inch higher than the other. I know this is not your specialty, but do you know of any source to trust in those matters, including perhaps some on the RP team? I'd like to correct this for aesthetic and performance reasons. Clinical athlete.
Yep.
.com.
We don't do that. He does, and he's amazing.
Yep, and they've got a whole team. All right. So, to the live stream. You ready, James?
Ready.
Shimi Hacker says, do you think relative strength on certain exercises can act as a useful determinant or reliable prerequisite to determine one's readiness to engage in certain sports / aptitudes to excel at a given sport? Obviously, I don't mean barbell sports. We've often heard double bodyweight squat as a max prereq for effective plyometric training and as a baseline to start with intense sprint training. But do you think there are more stats like this that can be useful? Do you think the above squat stat is even useful? It's very useful because it's research confirmed. So the way they confirm this through research is they've actually tested people that have high maxes and low squat maxes, put them through plyometric programs and squat improvement programs. The people that were weak got better at plyos by getting stronger than they did by doing plyos. The people that were strong got better at plyos by doing plyos than by getting even stronger. So that's definitely confirmed. There are tons of these in other sports. I'm not an expert in other sports, so I have no idea what they are, but I'll tell you this. If you are anything other than an ultra heavyweight and you cannot do 10 bodyweight pull-ups, you're never going to be very good at jiu-jitsu. If you are a gymnast and you can't do a bazillion pull-ups or trillion push-ups, if you can't do weighted dips with probably close to your own body weight, you're never going to be a good gymnast, for example. So there's strength standards like this in every single sport, and you'd have to really know the sport to know them. James?
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting question. I like it a lot. So to kind of hit the first parts, prerequisite, no. Aptitude, yes, absolutely. So you can't exclude someone because they're weak or not fit enough to do certain things, because that's something that sometimes they can always
make up with different things too. Yeah. Sometimes they're really like, what's that guy? What's his name? He's an MMA fighter. He just wrestled against Jordan Burroughs.
Ben Askren?
Ben Askren. The nickname is Funky because he just does weird shit. He's not like a physical specimen. He just does weird shit.
Definitely not a physical specimen.
So sometimes you can do it, but it's one of those things like, if someone told me that my next grappling tournament, the guy can't do a single pull-up, I'd be very pleasantly surprised. I wouldn't. If they say he can do pull-ups with 100 pounds tied to his back, I'd be like, God damn it, this is going to be a war.
Yeah. So, Daniel, there's like Mike said, there's a ton of stuff, and you can find this in very formal numbers and what we call normative standards. And you can look up any sport. You can get a copy of the Essentials in Strength Conditioning. There's a whole fucking chapter with normative standards for different tests, different groups. This is stuff that's out there. It's very easy to find. And then also there's, like less formalized kind of, I don't want to call it anecdote, but like experiential stuff where if you talk to a coach, they'll tell you like, yeah, if you can't run, an 8-minute mile, like you're not going to do well in this sport. Or if you don't bench press this much, it's just like, you can ask a shot put coach, like how much do you think most of these guys should incline bench? And they'll probably have a pretty good idea. So yeah, you can definitely measure somebody's aptitude, but like people join sport for a variety of reasons. A lot of people join sport to gain fitness. So I don't think it should exclude them from fitness, but I think it can definitely be like, this guy's definitely not going to be a world champion at this. But that stuff's out there. There's not like a one size fits all. The only one size fits all one really is the squat one, because it's well documented and because strength is intrinsically tied to virtually all sports with the exception of a handful. So whenever you make somebody stronger, particularly in their lower body, they almost always get better in a variety of outcome measures. That's why the squat one works. But there's a ton of other stuff out there.
Yeah. Excellent answer. Felipe Machado says, "What's up, docs? I'm not watching the webinar now, but I had to pass by to leave an extra question."
Dude, that's like fucking crop dusting somebody, Felipe. Yeah, that's like when you fart next to somebody and walk away. Crop dust.
Somehow I managed to undereat during my deloading micro. Actually not trained at all when we were in London. I lost 2 kilograms that week. When I got back home, I decided to eat as I was on the micro just before London's week to average it out. Does it make any sense, or should I have kept that deficit? Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
I'll get to why in a second. I was probably carb depleted because I gained 1 kilogram back straight away, and now it's been stable for a week. I have 5 more micros total before going to travel. I won't be able to train for 3 or 4 weeks. I won't be able to for real. Okay. I thought on lowering the calories even more to keep losing fat for 2 more micros, then going to ISO or hyper for the rest of the meso. Then, if necessary, mini cut after that month and go off hyper. Going ISO or hyper was just to make sure I can last 6 micros of accumulation and prepare myself to have a higher isocaloric phase when I'm away. Well, it's not a phase if you're not training. It's just you're not training. It's not really a phase. I was talking to Shimmy, and he politely said, I'm biased because I'm a fat fuck, and I should keep hypo till the end. I go ISO during that month off, and then hyper, maybe mini cut before, because that 3 weeks of hyper before traveling won't have enough momentum to be helpful. What's the solution? People demand solutions, not trade-offs. P.S. I decided to accumulate for 6 weeks just to match the timing, but if you have any better recommendations, I'd appreciate it. I think if you're interested in being leaner, just go hypo the entire time. If you really can't train for 3 or 4 weeks after, who gives a shit anyway, because all the phasic stuff gets fucked up anyway. So just be lean for a couple weeks, hypo all the way.
Yeah, one thing that, just because you have this travel coming up, one thing that I could just devil's advocate a little bit just for the sake of spiciness. One thing I have found is that if you're going to be traveling and you want to enjoy your travel, it's good to be maintaining for 2 to 4 weeks before you go. That way your weight just stays kind of nice and stable the whole time, even
He's
if
also not training during
yeah,
travel.
that's the kind of thing that throws it off, where it's like, well, if you're not training, then it's kind of hard to even give you any suggestions. But just as an alternative, I would say you could just maintain, and then your body weight will pretty much stay the same no matter what at that point, with the exclusion of the not training. So that might be another option if you don't want to fuss with cutting. I'm actually doing that right now. So I just finished my cut. We're going to Australia very soon for 3 weeks, and I wanted to have a few weeks of maintenance under my belt so that when we go to Australia and I indulge in a few adult beverages and some snacks, my weight won't fluctuate quite as much.
Boom. Shima Hector says, the question asked earlier about deadlifts for field sport athletes, you both said it's useful for beginners and intermediates to build a base level of strength. How do you actually know when to cut bait on the exercise and progress them to other things? Actually, more of a global question. There are a handful of exercises like deads that serve as great general strength builders, but are largely inappropriate for intermediates and advanced athletes. How would you know when the athlete is ready for that? Would you use relative strength markers? Would you use predetermined set by rep by intensity markers as a way to standardize? It's not like you're looking at your basketball athletes or actors and saying, okay, they're thicker than before, now he's ready to go. Or stating that your football player's delts after he had been doing military press for a year and say, okay, his shoulders are bigger. Now it's time for push presses and jerks. How can you really tell? I've got some ideas too, but James, go ahead and hit it.
Yeah, so you can use other markers and like other performance standards, but the ultimate way to figure out this conundrum, it's the same thing that we've kind of said, rehashed in a slightly different way. When they train heavy deadlifts, not only can they not train legs at their normal scheduled time like they usually would, now they're having a hard time training anything else at their normally scheduled times, right? So when they overload their deadlift sessions, now there are transient fatigue effects that are affecting all other muscular and sporting systems. And this is really painfully apparent when you're dealing with non-bodybuilding athletes, right? So if you have a field sport athlete, a rugby player, soccer player, basketball, whatever, if you have them do heavy deadlifts and before everything was fine, you had a good program, they were making progress on their sport skills, tactics, all that stuff, and on their fitness, everything's great. At some point, they're going to have a heavy deadlift session where consistently they're going to start having bad practice sessions, bad training sessions that follow seemingly unpredictably. So that is going to be the best indicator where they have the intermediate conundrum where they're too strong for their own good on that deadlift. It's interfering with other things. So you're going to have to find something else to do.
Yep. Very, very good stuff. Martin Kumaru, our last caller for this evening, says, hey, docs, number one, I saw that Mike said his recent diet period was 4 months long. I was wondering why that was. I thought normally after 2 to 3 months it was recommended to take a maintenance period. Normally, people don't carry 210, 15 pounds of lean body mass and have been training for 20 years. So the average recommendations do not apply to everybody. And in all circumstances, 2 to 3 months is just an average figure. And definitely something that beginners and intermediates should be doing pretty regularly.
Yeah, can't go wrong.
Number two, related to that, I just finished up my first cutting meso, and I can see 2 mesos will not be enough, but it will be close since I'm going into a surplus afterward anyway. I was thinking of doing my 2 cutting mesos and then 2 to 3 weeks of mini cutting instead of wasting a month on maintenance. Remember, maintenance is not a waste, it's for a purpose. Just to be at a deficit for a couple more weeks. What are your thoughts? I think you should do a regular cut for 3 total mesos, because based on the history we know with you already and your proclivity to eat, so on and so forth, the body fat markers, I think you can stand to be in a calmer dieting phase in which you get leaner and then maintain and then slowly mass instead of mini cutting at the end of a diet, ravaging your hunger rebound like crazy and gaining a shitload of fat for no fucking.
Yeah, I don't understand why we're not why 3 mesos of cuts just not on the table. That's what I would do unless I'm missing something.
Totally. Number 3, I've watched web series with Dr. Jen Case. I believe it's called Nutrition Basics, super informative. She talked about having lean protein in a whey and a high glycemic carb source 30 minutes or so after training due to the increased benefits from doing so. That sounds a lot like the anabolic window. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought Brent Schoenfeld had done a study showing that whey spiked insulin just as much as high glycemic carbs shortly after training. So, first of all, a study doesn't refute anything.
Yeah.
Second of all, the carbohydrates do not just go towards spiking your insulin. They go towards a lot of other stuff like glycogen repletion, which whey does not do. So you're missing something. I'll tell you exactly what you're missing, Martin. You got to read the Renaissance Diet Book 2.0 in its entirety because it shows all of the mechanisms behind carbohydrate and protein supplementation.
Got it. Nailed it.
I thought. Same applies to the next several questions. I know the general recommendations for given fat intake minimum is 0.6 grams per kilogram. I was wondering how long one can dip that below and be fine. I assume it would obviously depend on one's fat intake. For example, if I took 20 to 30% off, so 55 grams of a minimum, but I only ate 40 grams a day, how long it would take to have a negative impact? We don't actually know the answer to that question. As a matter of fact, a lot of the researchers in the field debate whether or not the fat minimum is a realistic thing. From my experience as a coach, which is not that great, but my experience interacting with other coaches, which was great, and reading a lot of literature on this and experimenting on myself and others, I would say that 1 or 2 months of very low fat intake should be fine for most people. After that, you're asking for trouble. Can I put my stamp of scientific approval on that? No, that's just an observation. Number 5, he says, very related. I was also wondering, how do minimum fat intakes work exactly? Is it like vitamin C where you need to get a minimum amount every day? It's definitely not like that. Or is it more like vitamin D, which is ironically a fat-soluble vitamin? One can have a high intake one day and lower than another and evens out. It definitely evens out. But there might be transient day-to-day increases or decreases that affect you in various ways. For example, if you have very low fat one day, it might actually affect your sex drive that very day. It might affect your desire to train that very day. There's a lot of stuff we don't know about fat intake. The thing is, you shouldn't be at these crazy below minimum fat intakes because there's no good reason to be there. And then you're just radically altering your diet for no good goddamn reason because just eating a bunch of whole foods gets you to fat intake minimums pretty close.
Yeah.
Number 6, as you can imagine, I ask because I'd prefer to have as high carb intake as possible. And with that, I've been a member of the RP Facebook group for a while now. Okay, so you know, less than average. I'm just kidding. Something I see is consistently complained about is general tiredness and brain fog even after just a couple of days. I get it if it's on prep or something that bad, but is 1% a week body weight loss not the same for most not super lean people? Do fewer carbs just hit some people harder than others? Oh God, yes. Just the hypocaloric condition does.
Yeah.
You got people who are not used to being in a hypocaloric condition. It feels like shit. Or am I missing something? No, I don't think you're missing anything. The only difference experiencing with dieting compared to gaining is having a bit less energy, slightly worse mood, and increased cravings for sweet foods / focus, where some people seem to be hit super hard by dieting. Some people can run through a diet like machines. They don't feel a fucking thing. And they just lose pounds and pounds and pounds. They're like, oh, I'm great. And some people get hit super hard by the minimal alterations. So one thing that, Martin, if you ever get into coaching others, you'll notice is that no two people are exactly alike. And you got to understand that there's a huge range of response.
Yeah, and some people just have a higher threshold for discomfort, really. So they might hit them just as hard as anyone else, but they just deal with it. They don't, it doesn't phase them in the sense that it doesn't cripple their world. They're just like, well, this sucks, and they just keep go about their day. So.
Yep. Funny enough,
individual variability there.
Back before James joined RP, I did a lot of data analysis on our existing clients and tried to figure out what body types and diet histories and food proclivities correlated to best success. We found out that the only thing that dropped out of the correlation was people who have careers in fields in which they have a high degree of basically like anal retentiveness. So our best clients of all time are corporate lawyers because they're fucking machines. They do whatever it needs to get the job done. They work 100 hours a week. I'm like, how do you feel on the diet? They're like, I'm surviving. I almost passed out today, but I kept going. I was like, Jesus Christ, the fuck is wrong with you? And they're like, I've lost 2 pounds every single week for the last 16 weeks. Like, can you keep going? They're like, I'll keep going as long as I need to. I'm like, oh my fucking God. Like, I guess this is what graduating from Harvard means, So
and there are some people whose world falls apart if they can't have chocolate day, so.
Exactly. Thanks, Menno, for that one. Somebody ask if you ever see Menno, ask him for his chocolate day story. You won't be disappointed. We'll be seeing Menno, James, in Australia. You can ask him directly about chocolate day.
Oh my God, that story was so funny.
So, side note, I asked about eating cereals with a higher fiber content after training because it did not make sense to me to follow the advice of eat cereal after training because it's very high glycemic and later being told that the kind of cereal I ate had too much fiber. I might as well have eaten something else instead. Totally.
Yeah.
Good to know it's okay to stick with my Special K cereal. Yep, it's a very, very moot point.
Yeah.
Thanks for the answers. You're welcome. Lastly, Hans Gruber's older brother says, Mike, I'm training 2 sessions a day, 6 days a week. What pitfalls should I watch out for as the volume increases? My recovery game is on point. I'm getting great pump, soreness, and PRs every session. Best training I've had in a long time. Me too. I'm doing just one less session. Stephen, accumulated fatigue. You might feel great day to day, and then on week 3, you feel like Mr. Potato Head and your body falls apart. So what I would say is your volume upregulation and your recovery need to stay on point and on the easier side of things because you've never been in this kind of deep water before. Inch in slowly. So basically, don't be like, man, I feel great. I need to bump the volume like shitload. Just follow your responses and auto-regulate like you're supposed to, and don't get ahead of yourself because you feel great now because it's a great setup. Acutely, if I had to do a week of crazy training, I would split up a shitload of sessions. That's what we do. But the thing is, a week of crazy training still dumps that much more cumulative fatigue into the next week and the next week and the next week. So I almost make a prediction. If you have a 3 session for 3 hours, James, you're going to actually like this a lot. 3 sessions a week, each one's 3 hours long. That is going to feel like shit the first week and kind of about the same the second week, about the same the third. Because it's only 9 hours of training a week, you don't accumulate a ton of fatigue. It's just every session sucks dick. However, if you have a total of 20 hours of training a week, but every session is like 1 or 2 hours and it's 2 or 3 sessions a day, the first week you're never going to feel super burdened because your cumulative fatigue is low, and every session is just not that hard because you hit the gym, leave, hit the gym, leave, hit the gym, leave. But the next week is going to be that much more cumulative fatigue, that much more, because there's no replacing that 20 hours of cumulative fatigue. It still hits you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
So watch out for that cumulative wave. It's like a slow rising wave. It's almost exactly like a tsunami, right? You look at it from afar and you're like, that doesn't look like a big deal. That thing has a huge fucking below the water shit moving in it. So that's what your training is like.
Whew, that was a lot.
That's it, man. That was a
shitload.
shitload.
I think I managed to not get in trouble this week, so that's good.
Yeah, I got more trouble than you did.
Yeah, that's right. I think we're on for next week as well. Normal biz.
Yeah, I think we're on live next week.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I in the same place. No, wait, I take that back.
No.
Oh my God, what am I talking about? No, I fast forwarded my brain 2 weeks, 3 weeks in advance to Australia. James,
because you're so pumped about Australia.
Dude, seriously. Next week, I am in the countries of Europe with my wife, and thus I believe I'll have to jump into the debit card with you and ask you to single-handedly host a webinar.
Yeah, that's fine. I can cover next week myself, and then we can pick up.
I'll get you back during your wedding week.
Yeah, there we go. We can trade. All right, folks. So next week probably just sounds like it's just going to be me, unless Mike's honeymoon is a disaster and he ends up back in Philadelphia. So if you guys know, kind of my area of expertise generally is more in like the sporting stuff. So if you have any sporting questions or anything recovery related, I'd be happy to tackle those. And if you have regular questions like we always have, that's fine too. Do my best. Dr. Mike, we'll see you, I guess, in 2 weeks then. Yeah.
Yep. And then in 3 weeks, we're going to be live together. And then we'll probably be doing these things in Australia too. So we'll be together for a while.
Fuck. Yeah, that's right. We're going to be doing it for we're going to be on the road for 3 weeks this time. Holy shit. It's going to be nuts.
Yahoo.
All right. So folks, if you're interested in Australia, we finally have it up on the website. You can check out all of the upcoming seminars and appearances that all of us RP folks are going to be at. So check those out. Until next time. See you later.